Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we drift into a Boston that smells of salt smoke and damp wood, a city where your boots meet uneven cobblestones, still slick from last night's fog. You are here before anything officially explodes, before history books assign neat causes and effects. Lamps glow low and tired windows breathe out warmth. And somewhere nearby a cart rattles like it has been doing the same job for decades. You probably won't survive this with your modern expectations intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights and let yourself step fully into this place where nothing feels settled yet. Everything feels ordinary. You move slowly through the streets because everyone does. Boston in the early 1770s is not a city of haste. It is a city of friction. Each step reminds you that the ground beneath you has been laid by hands that never imagined millions would later debate their choices. Houses lean toward one another as if sharing secrets. Rooflines crowd the sky and laundry flutters overhead like tired flags. The air carries layers, brine from the harbour, smoke from hearths that never quite burn clean. The faint sourness of refuse that no one has had time or energy to move very far away. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly as you walk. Boston is one of the largest towns in British North America, home to roughly 16,000 people, which makes it busy enough to feel crowded and small enough that news travels faster than footsteps. You cannot disappear here. Someone always recognises your coat, your gait, or the way you favour one side of the street. You notice how people glance before they speak. Conversations pause when unfamiliar boots approach. It is not paranoia exactly, it is awareness. British soldiers have been stationed in the city for years now, and their presence presses on daily life like a weight that shifts but never lifts. Red uniforms flicker at the edges of your vision. You tell yourself you are just going about your day, but your shoulders tighten anyway. Sound defines the rhythm of the place. Church bells call not only the faithful, but the clockless. Carts creak, horses snort. Somewhere a cooper taps metal hoops into place, the ringing note echoing between buildings. It is a working city, and the work does not stop for politics, even when politics refuses to stay out of the way. You pass a group of women bent over buckets, scrubbing linen against boards. Steam rises around their hands. They speak softly, efficiently, with the intimacy of shared labour. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness here. Laundry work is often done outdoors, even in colder months, because space indoors is too precious, and damp cloth inside invites sickness. Comfort is a luxury measured carefully. Inside the houses, you glimpse through open doors, life compresses further. Rooms serve multiple purposes. Beds are shared not just by couples, but sometimes by children or boarders. Privacy is not a right. It is an occasional gift. The walls are thin, and you learn quickly which neighbours snore, which argue, and which cry when they think no one hears. You smell breakfast drifting from somewhere. Porridge, bread. Maybe a bit of salt pork if the household is fortunate. Meals are simple, repetitive, and deeply tied to what arrives at the docks. When ships are delayed, stomachs notice. This dependence on trade makes the harbour feel less like scenery and more like a pulse you rely on without thinking about it too much. As you continue, you become aware of paper, notices pasted to walls, handbills passed discreetly from hand to hand. Words feel heavier here than they should. Historians still argue whether the average Bostonian fully understood how radical these printed arguments were at the time, or whether they simply felt something was wrong and followed that instinct. Either way, reading is rarely passive now. Each paragraph asks you to choose a side, even if you are not ready. You hear laughter from a tavern door and the sharp clink of mugs. Taverns are not just places to drink. They are where news settles into opinion, where a man can test a thought aloud and see how it lands. You do not go in yet, but you register the noise, the warmth spilling into the street, the sense that something inside is always being discussed more intensely than the weather. The British soldiers you pass look bored more than threatening. Some are barely older than boys. Their boots are scuffed, their posture stiff. You remind yourself that they are here to enforce order, at least on paper. Still, the way their eyes linger tells you that order feels personal now. Surveillance does not need walls or towers when it can simply stand at the corner and watch who passes. You become aware of your own body in this environment, how you carry yourself, how you avoid eye contact without appearing evasive, how you slow your pace to match others. Blending in is a skill learned early here. Standing out invites questions you may not want to answer. At the edge of the town, you glimpse the water. The harbour stretches grey and patient masts rising like a forest stripped of leaves. Ships are lifelines and threats at the same time. They bring goods, news and authority from far away. They also carry reminders that decisions affecting your daily life are made across an ocean by people who will never smell this air or walk these streets. Another small, almost domestic detail surfaces. Many homes keep candles burning longer than necessary, not for light, but for comfort. Flame suggests continuity. As long as something burns, life feels less precarious. It is a quiet ritual rarely written about, yet deeply felt. As the day edges forward, you sense the tension, not as anger, but as compression, like a held breath shared by thousands. Scholars continue to debate whether Boston's reputation as a hotbed of rebellion exaggerates how unified people actually were. What you feel instead is fragmentation. Neighbours agree on some things and avoid others. Families argue behind closed doors. Silence becomes a form of participation. You stop near a shop window and catch your reflection. The glass is uneven, warping your face slightly. It feels appropriate. Identity here is shifting, bending under pressure. You are still a subject of the British Crown officially, yet the word feels less solid than it did a decade ago. The sun climbs higher, and with it the noise level rises. More carts, more voices, more reasons to stay alert. Nothing dramatic happens in this moment, and that is exactly the point. Life does not announce its turning points. It continues until it cannot. You take one last look down the street, memorizing the shapes and sounds without knowing why. Somewhere ahead, events will demand choices. For now, you simply walk, listening to the city breathe, unaware of how soon ordinary steps will be remembered as the calm before everything changed. You drift naturally from the street into a doorway without quite deciding to. Homes in Boston rarely announce themselves. Doors open directly onto the street as if privacy were an afterthought. Inside, the light softens immediately. The air changes. It smells of damp wall smoke that clings to everything, and the faint sweetness of stored grain. You pause just long enough for your eyes to adjust, and then the interior reveals itself as a kind of controlled compression. The room is smaller than your instincts expect. Low ceiling, beams darkened by years of soot. Every surface seems to serve two purposes, sometimes three. A table doubles as workspace and dining surface. Benches slide beneath it when not in use. Shelves climb the walls holding crockery tools, folded cloth, and objects whose purpose is no longer obvious, but which no one dares discard. Space here is not empty, it is negotiated. A mainstream historical detail settles quietly into the room with you. Most Boston houses in the 1770s are built of wood, not brick, despite the fire risk, because timber is cheaper and faster to work. Brick homes exist, but they signal wealth instantly. You do not need to ask who is doing well. The walls tell you. You hear the hearth before you really see it. The fire never roars unless absolutely necessary. Fuel is precious. Heat is coaxed, not demanded. A kettle hangs nearby, always within reach, because hot water is both comfort and medicine. You notice how everyone moves around the fire with unconscious precision, careful not to block heat from reaching the rest of the room. There is no clear boundary between rooms. Curtains sometimes replace doors. A bed sits in what would once have been called the main living space. Another bed narrower is tucked into an alcove. Children sleep wherever there is room. Boarders, if present, sleep where negotiation allows. Privacy is understood as a temporary condition, something you borrow and return. You run your fingers along the wall and feel the grain of the wood beneath layers of whitewash. Tiny cracks snake through it, letting in drafts that cannot be entirely stopped. Families stuff rags into gaps, repaint, repair, and accept that winter will always find a way inside. Comfort here is relative. You aim for survivable rather than pleasant. A woman moves across the room carrying a bundle of mended clothes. Her motions are efficient, almost musical. She does not hurry, but nothing is wasted. A quirky domestic truth becomes apparent. Housework in this era is physically demanding and never truly finished. Clothes are repaired until the fabric gives up entirely. Broken items are repurposed. Nothing leaves the household unless it has fully exhausted its usefulness. You sit and the chair creaks in protest. Furniture is sturdy but unforgiving. Padding is minimal. You adjust your weight and realise how accustomed people become to small discomforts. When everything is a little uncomfortable all the time, you stop noticing. The soundscape inside is intimate. Wood pops in the fire. Someone coughs quietly. Outside, noise filters in easily. Hooves, voices, a distant bell. The house does not shield you from the world. It filters it just enough to make it manageable. You notice a Bible on a shelf, its spine worn smooth by hands that have opened it often. Nearby, a stack of pamphlets sits partly hidden. Their presence feels deliberate. Religion and politics share space uneasily here, both offering explanations for hardship, both demanding loyalty. Historians continue to discuss how deeply political ideas penetrated everyday households at this stage, or whether many people simply absorbed the mood without dissecting the arguments. From where you sit, the distinction feels academic. Ideas live here whether they are fully understood or not. Food preparation happens in the same space as conversation, rest and repair. A loaf of bread cools on a board. Someone breaks off a piece without ceremony. Meals are not events. They are interruptions to work. Eating quickly standing, if necessary, is normal. Hunger is familiar enough not to be alarming, but never ignored. You become aware of the cold in layers. The floor pulls heat from your feet. The air cools your face. The fire warms your hands. The body adapts by prioritizing. People here learn how to exist slightly chilled without complaint. Thick stockings, layered skirts, wool coats, worn indoors all winter long. Warmth is something you build gradually, not something you expect the house to provide automatically. Night will bring further adjustments. Beds are shared for warmth as much as intimacy. Children crawl in beside parents. Blankets pile up. Candles are extinguished early to save tallow. Darkness arrives quickly and is accepted without resistance. Sleep is lighter than you are used to. Every sound registers. The house creaks. Wind presses against walls. You remain alert, even in rest. A small, easily missed detail catches your attention. A chamber pot sits discreetly behind a screen. Indoor plumbing is a fantasy. Nighttime trips outside are avoided whenever possible, especially in winter. This practical arrangement shapes how people move after dark, how much water they drink before bed, how long they linger awake. You sense the emotional atmosphere as much as the physical one. Families talk, but selectively. Certain topics are navigated carefully. The presence of British authority feels closer indoors than it does on the street. Walls are thin. Neighbours are close. A careless word can travel further than intended. Silence becomes a form of protection. Scholars still debate how much fear truly shaped daily domestic life versus how much routine simply absorbed uncertainty. From inside this room, the answer feels like both. Fear exists, but it is folded into habit. You do what needs doing because it still needs doing. As evening approaches, the light fades unevenly. Shadows stretch. The fire becomes the centre of gravity. Faces glow briefly, then disappear into dimness. The house contracts inward, conserving energy, conserving warmth, conserving resolve. You realise that this interior life, so constrained and repetitive, is not separate from the political storm outside. It is the reason it matters. What happens in Parliament eventually reaches this hearth. Taxes affect this bread. Laws ripple into this room. You settle into the rhythm without trying to change it. The house holds you the way it holds everyone, not comfortably, but persistently. And as you sit there listening to the fire breathe, you understand that whatever comes next will pass through spaces just like this, reshaping them quietly before anyone can name what has changed. Morning does not arrive all at once. It filters in through shutters and thin glass, easing itself into the room with a grey patience. You wake not because you feel rested, but because the house has decided it is time to move again. Somewhere nearby a bell begins to ring, not urgently, just firmly enough to remind everyone that the day has expectations. You step back outside and the city greets you with sound first. Vendors call out before they are fully visible. Barrels roll across stone. The rhythm of footsteps multiplies. The market is already awake, and you are late only by the standard of those who have been here since before dawn. A mainstream historical truth settles into view as you approach the open square. Boston's markets are not centralised in a single grand building. Trade spills into streets and corners, shaping itself around available space. Food is sold where it can be, when it can be, and freshness is judged by smell, touch and trust rather than labels. You pass tables laid with fish still gleaming with harbour moisture. Cod dominates everything. Salted, dried, fresh when luck allows. The scent is sharp and unavoidable. Nearby baskets of apples sit beneath cloths, their skins dulled from storage. Root vegetables appear dependable and boring, which is exactly why they matter. Onions, turnips, carrots. Food here is fuel first, pleasure second. Women haggle with practiced restraint. Voices rise and fall, but rarely escalate. Everyone knows that tomorrow they will see one another again. Reputation matters more than a single bargain. You notice how prices shift depending on who is speaking, how long they have known each other, and what favours are still remembered. A quirky detail emerges if you linger long enough. Many vendors sell on credit, trusting customers to settle accounts later. Coin is scarce. Relationships function as currency. Breaking that trust can exile you socially faster than any formal punishment. You feel politics hovering even here between baskets and barrels. Imported goods draw scrutiny. A piece of cloth, a wedge of cheese. Someone asks quietly where it came from. Someone else answers just as quietly. Choices that once felt mundane now signal alignment. Historians still argue whether economic protest truly unified Boston's population, or whether it deepened existing divisions under the appearance of solidarity. From your place in the crowd, unity feels conditional and fragile. You move carefully, aware of how tightly packed bodies are. Elbows brush, sleeves catch. Apologies are exchanged automatically. The market demands cooperation. It also provides cover. Conversations happen in fragments layered over noise. News slips through this space disguised as gossip. You hear mention of a ship delayed, of another that arrived unexpectedly, of customs officers lingering longer than usual. Each detail lands with weight. The harbour governs the market's mood. When ships do not come, anxiety thickens. When they arrive with unwanted cargo, anger follows. The bell rings again, closer now. Church time approaches, but not everyone moves toward worship. Bells regulate more than prayer. They structure labour. They tell apprentices when to begin. They remind shopkeepers when to open shutters fully. Time here is communal, not personal. You pause near a bread seller. Loaves are dense, dark and heavy. Flour quality varies. Bread reflects the year more than the baker. You trade coin and receive something warm enough to steam faintly in the cool air. Eating as you walk feels normal. Meals bend around the day rather than interrupting it. Children dart between legs, carrying messages baskets, or nothing at all. They absorb the market's tone instinctively. They learn which vendors smile, which snap, which listen. Their education happens here as much as anywhere else. Scholars continue to discuss how early children in colonial cities became economically aware, and whether this fostered resilience or anxiety. Watching them navigate this space, you suspect it is both. You notice a group gathered slightly apart. The energy shifts. Voices lower. Someone reads aloud from a folded sheet. You do not catch every word, but phrases drift toward you. Rights, grievances, representation. The language feels heavy for a morning purchase of apples, yet no one seems surprised. Politics has stopped waiting for formal settings. British soldiers pass nearby, their presence altering the flow. Some people stiffen, others ignore them pointedly. The soldiers do not intervene. They observe. Their boots leave clearer impressions in the dirt, and you follow those marks briefly without meaning to. Authority leaves tracks even when it stands still. Sound layers upon sound. Hammering from a nearby shop. Laughter from a group who have not yet learned to be cautious, a woman scolding a child for straying too far. The market is not harmonious, it is functional. That is enough. As the morning deepens, the crowd thins slightly. Those who needed only essentials depart. Those with time linger. Deals continue. Words continue. You sense that this place does more than distribute goods. It distributes mood. Optimism or unease spreads here faster than anywhere else. You think about how little of this will be recorded. No ledger will note the tone of a conversation. No official document will capture the way hands hesitate over imported cloth. Yet these moments accumulate. They shape decisions that later appear sudden and dramatic. You finish your bread and brush crumbs from your fingers. The bell fades. Work calls people away. Shops pull down shutters part way. The market dissolves back into streets. As you walk on, carrying what you have acquired, you realize that survival here depends on attentiveness, knowing when to speak, when to listen, when to buy, when to wait. The market teaches this quietly every morning. And as you leave its noise behind, the city feels slightly more awake, slightly more tense, as if each transaction has nudged it closer to something it cannot yet name. Work claims you before you have time to reflect on how little rest the night actually gave. In Boston, labour does not wait for clarity or comfort. It simply resumes as steady and demanding as the tide. You move toward the docks or the workshop or wherever your hands are expected to be today, guided by habit more than enthusiasm. If you are a dock worker, the harbour greets you with cold air and the creak of rigging. Masts sway gently and ropes rub against wood with a sound that never quite fades into the background. Ships sit heavy in the water, their holds full of goods that must be moved quickly and carefully. Time matters here. Weather matters. Delays cost money that rarely trickles down to those doing the lifting. It was generally accepted at the time that most working men in Boston lived one slow injury away from hardship. There are no safety nets. A strained back or crushed finger can mean lost wages, and lost wages mean fewer meals. You lift anyway. Everyone does. Strength is not admired here so much as assumed. If your work keeps you inland, perhaps as a shoemaker or carpenter, the day has a different rhythm but the same uncertainty. Tools are personal and precious. A well-balanced hammer or a sharp awl is an extension of your body. You know the feel of each piece of wood or leather by touch alone. Mistakes waste material you cannot afford to replace easily. Apprentices hover nearby, learning by watching more than by instruction. Their education is practical, repetitive, and unforgiving. They learn that time is not theirs to manage yet. They arrive early, leave late, and absorb the unspoken rule that complaining marks you as unreliable. Payment is inconsistent. Some days you are paid in coin, other days in goods. Sometimes not at all, with a promise that hangs uncertainly in the air. One overlooked detail of working life is how often credit replaces wages. Your labour might settle a debt or create one, blurring the line between employment and obligation. You notice how conversation threads through work without ever stopping it. Men talk while lifting, sawing, stitching. Politics enters these exchanges sideways, never announced. Someone mentions a customs officer interfering with a shipment. Someone else mutters about unfair competition. No one needs to raise their voice for the point to land. There remains lively discussion among historians about whether economic frustration or ideological conviction drove most ordinary workers toward rebellion. Standing here with sore arms and cold fingers, the distinction feels thin. Ideas matter more when survival feels precarious. Lunch is brief and unceremonious. Bread again. Perhaps cheese if you are fortunate. Maybe a small piece of dried meat saved for this purpose. You eat standing up, leaning against a wall or crate, watching the harbour or the street while you chew. Meals restore energy but not comfort. That is not their job. A curious workplace habit emerges if you pay attention. Many labourers work at a pace designed to last the day rather than impress. Overexertion today risks injury tomorrow. Endurance matters more than speed. This quiet wisdom rarely appears in records, yet it governs how bodies move through the hours. British authority remains present but indirect. An officer might pass through the docks accompanied by clerks. Their questions are polite but pointed. Documentation matters. Licenses are checked. Compliance is expected. You answer carefully, not because you have something to hide, but because attention itself can bring trouble. Work does not shield you from the broader mood of the city. News reaches you mid-task. Someone brings word of another tax enforcement. Someone else claims to have heard of resistance forming elsewhere. The accuracy of these reports matters less than their effect. They lodge in your thoughts, making each repetitive motion feel slightly heavier. By mid-afternoon, fatigue settles in. Muscles ache. Fingers stiffen. The smell of the harbour or the workshop clings to you. There is no early dismissal. Work ends when the light fades enough to make it impractical to continue. Women work just as steadily, though often in less visible ways. Seamstresses stitch for long hours by fading light. Shopkeepers balance accounts and customers with equal care. Laundresses labour over heavy wet cloth. Their contributions are constant and rarely acknowledged, yet households and businesses depend on them entirely. Some modern scholars suggest that women's economic roles during this period quietly shaped political resistance by necessity rather than ideology. Others argue their influence has been overstated by later interpretation. What you see is simpler. Work must be done, and whoever can do it does. As the day closes, you take stock of what you earned. Sometimes the tally feels adequate. Sometimes it does not. Planning beyond a week feels optimistic. You focus instead on immediate needs. Food, rent, fuel, everything else waits. You clean your tools carefully. Maintenance extends their life and yours. You store them in familiar places, knowing that tomorrow will require them again. There is comfort in repetition. Familiar tasks anchor you when the future feels uncertain. Walking home, your body carries the memory of labour. Each step reminds you of the day's weight. The city feels different now, quieter, more inward. Lamps begin to glow, fires are stoked. Work has not clarified your beliefs or eased your worries. It rarely does. But it has reminded you of what is at stake. Whatever changes are coming will interrupt this rhythm, this fragile balance between effort and survival. For now, you are tired enough to accept the present as it is. You move toward a shelter, knowing that tomorrow will demand the same from you, and that certainty at least remains intact. Evening draws you toward warmth without asking permission. The street cools quickly once the sun slips away and bodies naturally angle themselves toward places where light leaks out through shutters and door frames. A tavern does not advertise comfort loudly. It simply exists steady and open like a promise you do not question. You step inside and are met by a wall of sound that is softer than it seems from the street. Voices overlap without competing. Laughter rises and falls. Mugs meet wood with dull certainty. The smell is unmistakable. Fermented grain, smoke, wet wool drying slowly near the hearth. You do not need to drink to belong here, but it helps. Taverns in Boston function as more than drinking spaces. Contemporary accounts make it clear that they operate as informal meeting halls, post offices, newsrooms, and occasionally courtrooms of opinion. You choose a spot near the wall, close enough to listen without becoming part of any one conversation. Rum is poured generously. It is cheaper than beer much of the time and arrives reliably from the Caribbean. Sugar and molasses tie this drink to an empire that feels distant and uncomfortably close all at once. You sip slowly, stronger than you expect, warming in a way that spreads rather than soothes. Something easily overlooked slips into your awareness. Taverns often keep chalk marks behind the bar, tracking credit rather than cash. Tabs are common. Trust underpins the entire system. Fail to settle your account, and word travels faster than forgiveness. Talk drifts inevitably toward politics, but it does not begin there. Someone complains about the weather, someone else mentions a delay at the docks. Gradually the reasons for the delay surface. A customs inspection, a disputed manifest, a ship held longer than necessary. The mood shifts by degrees. There is ongoing disagreement among historians about whether tavern culture actively radicalized ordinary colonists or merely reflected tensions already present. From where you sit, it feels less intentional than inevitable. When people gather regularly, they share what weighs on them. Lately, that weight has a name, even if no one says it outright. A man near the fire leans forward as he speaks, voice lowered but confident. He references rights as something tangible, like a tool taken from your hands. Others nod. A few remain silent eyes on their mugs. Silence carries meaning here too. You notice how careful people are with phrasing. Jokes soften statements that might otherwise sound dangerous. Sarcasm provides cover. Someone laughs after saying something sharp, giving it plausible deniability. The room understands this unspoken code. British soldiers drink in taverns as well, though not always the same ones. When they appear, the tone adjusts subtly. Conversations reroute. Topics shift. No one challenges them directly. Tension hums beneath the surface, never fully voiced. You become aware of how taverns manage disagreement. Voices rarely rise to shouting. Physical fights are bad for business. Disputes are contained through humour redirection or simple ignoring. The goal is release, not resolution. Another small but telling habit emerges. Many taverns keep newspapers available, often outdated by weeks. Even so, they are read aloud, debated, dissected. Print extends the life of arguments, allowing them to be revisited and reshaped long after ink dries. Some scholars suggest that the oral culture of taverns mattered as much as pamphlets in shaping revolutionary sentiment. Others caution against overstating their influence. Sitting here, you sense that the power lies not in persuasion, but in permission. Taverns allow people to say what they might otherwise keep locked inside. The fire crackles. Someone refills your mug without asking. The warmth loosens your shoulders. For a moment, the strain of the day recedes. This is not escape so much as pause. Tomorrow will bring the same demands, but tonight offers a brief sense of shared endurance. You overhear a story told for the third time, each version slightly different. Memory bends to audience reaction. Details sharpen or soften accordingly. truth becomes something shaped collectively rather than preserved precisely. It does not feel dishonest. It feels human. As the evening deepens, the crowd thins unevenly. Some leave early to preserve strength. Others linger reluctant to return to cold rooms and unfinished worries. Candles burn lower. Shadows lengthen across faces. You finish your drink and stand carefully, letting your balance settle. Outside, the air feels sharper now, the quiet more pronounced after the layered noise within. You carry fragments of conversation with you, pieces you will turn over later without quite meaning to. The tavern door closes behind you, and with it a pocket of warmth and words. You step back into the street, aware that what was said inside will travel, not as quotes, as impressions, as resolve slowly taking shape. As you walk on, you realise that rebellion here does not begin with declarations. It begins with evenings like this, where frustration finds company, and company gives it staying power. You notice the soldiers before you intend to, a flash of red at the edge of the street, the distinct rhythm of boots that do not quite match the city's usual cadence. They are never exactly where you expect them to be, and the unpredictability is part of the point. Their presence is meant to be felt more than announced. British troops have been stationed in Boston since 1768, and by now their visibility has become part of the city's background, like the smell of the harbour or the uneven stones underfoot. Officially, they are here to maintain order. Practically, they occupy space that once belonged to civilians, quartered in public buildings, private homes, and makeshift barracks that strain under the arrangement. You pass them on your way through the street, eyes forward, pace measured. You do not hurry. Hurrying draws attention. You do not linger either. Lingering invites questions. This balance becomes instinctive with practice. The soldiers themselves look tired more often than threatening. Their uniforms are worn thin at the seams. Boots scuffed, faces young. Many enlisted for reasons that feel distant from imperial policy, pay, food, escape from something worse. You catch snippets of accents not native to this place. Ireland, Scotland, England's rural edges. They are far from home, and the city knows it. An understated truth of the occupation reveals itself if you watch long enough. Soldiers spend a surprising amount of time standing still, at corners, near buildings, outside taverns. The stillness is deliberate. It reminds you that movement is being observed. You hear people speak of them indirectly. The troops, the regulars, rarely by name. Naming makes things personal, and personal things are harder to manage. Better to treat them as a category, a condition you adapt to, rather than confront. There remains debate among historians about how aggressive or restrained British military policy in Boston truly was, before open conflict. Some accounts emphasise provocation. Others point to discipline and restraint. Living here, the distinction blurs. Even restraint feels oppressive when it is constant. You see a woman adjust her basket as she approaches a checkpoint. Her shoulders tense. The soldier asks where she is going. She answers calmly. The exchange lasts seconds, but the tension lingers long after she passes. These small moments accumulate, shaping how people move through their own city. Children stare openly. Soldiers are fascinating to them. Uniforms, muskets, drums. They imitate the marching when they think no one is watching. Adults correct them quickly. Play becomes risky when cymbals are loaded. A curious detail emerges in quieter moments. Some soldiers take on small jobs during off hours, repairing shoes, cutting hair, offering labour for extra coin. The city resents their presence, yet absorbs them economically. Survival blurs moral lines. You notice how taverns react when soldiers enter. Conversations do not stop. They shift. Laughter becomes louder. Topics turn safe. Weather. Work. Someone tells a story that leads nowhere. The performance is smooth practiced. Printed orders are posted occasionally nailed to walls where anyone can read them. They outline expectations, curfews, conduct, consequences. You read them carefully, noting not just what they say, but what they imply. Authority is clarifying its boundaries, and that usually means those boundaries are being tested. Some modern scholars argue that constant military presence radicalised the population by sheer proximity. Others suggest that fatigue and familiarity dulled its impact over time. Walking these streets, you feel both effects. The sight of red coats no longer shocks you, but it never fully relaxes you either. At night, patrols move through the city with lanterns that cast long, unstable shadows. You hear them before you see them, voices calling time, boots echoing. The sound reaches into houses, into sleep, reminding you that rest is conditional. You adjust your habits accordingly. You avoid certain routes after dark. You plan errands for daylight. You keep explanations ready even when you have done nothing wrong. This mental preparation becomes second nature. A small but telling adaptation emerges. People learn to communicate more with glances and less with words. A raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, meaning passes quietly, leaving no record. You realise that living under watch changes how you understand yourself. You become more aware of your body, your posture, your expressions. You practice neutrality until it feels like a skill. Inside opinions still churn. Outside, you offer nothing to interpret. As you move past another group of soldiers, one meets your eyes briefly. Not hostile, not friendly, simply aware. The look lingers just long enough to remind you that the city is no longer solely yours. You continue on, blending back into the flow of civilians. The street absorbs you again, but the sensation of being seen does not fade. It follows you home, settles near the hearth, and waits. Living this way does not inspire dramatic rebellion in a single moment. It reshapes patience. It erodes trust. It teaches you that ordinary freedom can disappear quietly, one watched step at a time. And as the lamps flicker on and the city lowers its voice, you carry that awareness with you, knowing that tomorrow the red coats will still be there, and so will you, adapting again. You become aware of the taxes long before you ever calculate them. They arrive folded into ordinary tasks, stitched into habits you once performed without thinking. A stamp on a document, a duty on tea, a fee added quietly at the point where paper changes hands. Nothing dramatic announces their presence, yet they alter the texture of daily life all the same. By this point in the decade, it is simply part of life that certain papers require official stamps to be considered valid. Contracts, licenses, newspapers, even playing cards. The idea is not complicated, but its reach is wide. You feel it when a transaction slows, when someone hesitates before signing, when a clerk glances at a drawer that should contain stamped paper and finds it empty. Tea is harder to ignore. It sits at the centre of routines that begin and end the day. Warmth, familiarity, a moment of pause. When its price shifts, everyone notices. You notice. You pour more carefully. You stretch sleeves longer than intended. You consider alternatives that never quite satisfy in the same way. People living here already know that taxes are not new. They have always existed in some form. What feels different now is distance. The decisions arrive from far away, shaped by people who do not walk these streets or share these constraints. That awareness sharpens every irritation. A small but telling adjustment slips into your habits. You begin asking quiet questions before purchases. Where did this come from? Was duty paid? Is there another option? These questions would have felt impolite once. Now they feel prudent. Shopkeepers respond in kind. Some answer plainly, others deflect. A glance, a shrug, a lowered voice. Trade adapts, becoming more coded. Everyone understands the subtext without naming it. There is no single scholarly consensus on how deeply most colonists understood the constitutional arguments tied to taxation at this stage. Some historians emphasize pamphlets and speeches. Others argue that lived experience mattered more than theory. From your vantage point, irritation precedes ideology. You feel wronged before you can articulate why. Documents become objects of tension. A folded paper in a pocket carries more than information. It carries risk. You handle it carefully as if the paper itself might betray you. A missing stamp can invalidate agreements, invite fines, or provoke unwanted attention. Something rarely mentioned yet, oddly important, is how often people reuse stamped paper by trimming margins or writing around old marks. Ingenuity thrives when resources are constrained. It is a small rebellion disguised as thrift. Conversations about taxes rarely stay abstract. They attach themselves to stories. A merchant delayed, a shipment seized, a printer fined. These examples circulate widely, gaining emotional weight with each retelling. You hear them in markets, in taverns, in doorways, half closed against the cold. British officials insist the taxes are modest and fair. Perhaps on paper they are, but paper does not account for thin margins. It does not feel the difference between comfort and worry. Each added cost presses against lives already balanced carefully. You notice how resentment expresses itself unevenly. Some people grow vocal, others withdraw. Silence becomes its own statement. Refusal can look like absence rather than protest. Not buying, not drinking tea, not signing when expected. Interpretations still diverge when it comes to whether these early acts of resistance were coordinated or simply parallel choices made by frustrated individuals. Living here, coordination feels accidental. You do what makes sense for your household. Others do the same. Patterns emerge without planning. The emotional burden of compliance weighs heavier than the financial one. Paying a tax feels like agreement even when you resent it. Avoiding it feels risky. Either choice costs something beyond coin. Women feel this tension acutely in domestic spaces. They manage household purchases. They stretch supplies. They decide what enters the home. These decisions quietly shape resistance, even if they are never labelled as such. Some later scholars have pointed to this as an overlooked form of political action, while others caution against assigning intention where necessity ruled. From the inside, it feels like survival with an edge. You sense impatience growing, not explosive anger but fatigue. A weariness that settles in when small inconveniences stack without relief. Each new duty feels less negotiable than the last. The paperwork involved in trade becomes more elaborate. Forms multiply. Officials inspect. Time stretches. Delays ripple outward. A late shipment affects meals. A postponed payment affects rent. The web tightens. You realise that resistance does not require speeches. It thrives in hesitation. in the pause before purchase, in the decision to substitute, in the shared glance that says enough. As evening approaches, you brew something other than tea. It tastes wrong, but you drink it anyway. The act feels symbolic even if you do not frame it that way. Small refusals accumulate. You do not yet imagine war. That idea still feels distant and impractical. What you imagine instead is fairness, recognition, a voice that matters. Taxes have become the language through which those desires speak. As the cup cools in your hands, you understand that these levies have done more than raise prices. They have taught you to notice power in places you once overlooked. And once noticed power is hard to ignore. Crowds do not announce themselves when they begin. They form the way fog does, almost politely at first. A few people pause longer than usual. Someone stops walking altogether. Another person edges closer, pretending to adjust a sleeve or retie a shoe. Before you realise what is happening, you are no longer alone and the street has quietly changed its purpose. You find yourself standing among neighbours, acquaintances, strangers whose faces you recognise without knowing names. This happens often now. Gatherings bloom around small provocations, a cart inspected too aggressively, a merchant questioned too loudly, a rumour passed with just enough urgency to hold attention. Anyone living in Boston at this moment understands that crowds are neither rare nor accidental. They have become part of civic life, filling the gap between private frustration and public action. Sometimes they dissolve as easily as they form. Other times they harden into something with direction. Sound plays a crucial role. Voices overlap. Questions repeat. Someone calls out for clarification. Someone else responds with certainty they may or may not possess. You listen weighing tone more than content. Anger carries differently than concern. Curiosity feels lighter. Fear makes everything brittle. A detail often missed in grand retellings becomes clear when you are standing here. Crowds include women, apprentices, sailors, labourers, and shopkeepers together. This is not a formal assembly with invitations or seating. It is inclusive by necessity. Whoever is nearby becomes involved. You notice how quickly roles emerge. A man with a loud voice begins to frame events. Another with a calmer presence tempers him. Someone near the edge watches the street for approaching officials. Leadership forms and shifts without ceremony. There remains disagreement among modern historians about whether these gatherings should be understood as spontaneous or strategically encouraged by local activists. From your position in the middle, the distinction feels less important than the momentum. Once people stop moving, attention locks in place. British authority often responds cautiously at first. Soldiers observe from a distance. Officials hesitate before intervening. Experience has taught them that crowds can ignite if mishandled. You sense this restraint and feel its limits. A practical oddity slips into focus. People carry everyday objects that double as tools of persuasion. Sticks, ropes, tools from work. Not weapons exactly, but not neutral either. Their presence adds weight without crossing a line. The crowd shifts when someone mentions precedent, a past incident, a familiar grievance. Memory binds people faster than ideology. Shared experiences shorten the distance between strangers. You feel the emotional temperature rise, not into violence, but into insistence. People begin to speak as if resolution is expected. Demands form loosely, an apology, a release, an explanation. The crowd wants acknowledgement more than blood. Those at the centre feel exposed. A customs officer caught in this attention looks smaller than he did moments ago. His authority depends on structure, and structure has thinned. He speaks carefully, choosing words meant to calm without conceding too much. Interpretations still diverge on whether these moments represented popular justice or intimidation. Standing here, the sensation is ambiguous. There is power in numbers, but also vulnerability. One misstep could unravel everything. You become aware of your own body, your heart rate, the way you stand. You could step away, but you do not. Leaving feels like choosing silence. Staying feels like participation, even if you never speak. Children watch from doorways and windows. Their eyes are wide, absorbing a lesson no one planned to teach. This is how authority can be questioned. This is how risk looks up close. A small habit reveals itself as tension peaks. People repeat simple phrases: fairness, rights, decency. Repetition steadies nerves. It also builds rhythm, turning individual voices into something collective. Eventually something gives. Sometimes it is an agreement. Sometimes it is exhaustion. The official retreats. The crowd exhales. Movement resumes gradually, like blood returning to a limb. No one declares victory. No one admits defeat. People drift away, resuming errands with a new story to carry. The street looks the same, but it is not. It has proven it can transform. Scholars continue to argue about whether these crowd actions advance political goals or merely released pressure. Living through one, you understand that release itself matters. It prevents isolation. It reminds people they are not alone in their grievances. As the gathering dissolves, you feel strangely lighter and more alert at the same time. Adrenaline fades slowly. Thoughts sharpen. You replay moments evaluating who spoke well, who hesitated, who watched too closely. By the time you reach the end of the street, the city has resumed its ordinary rhythm. Carts pass. Doors open and close. Yet something invisible remains, charged like air after a storm that never quite broke. You realise that crowds have become a language here. A way of speaking when other avenues feel blocked. They are messy, unpredictable, and difficult to control, which is precisely why they matter. As you continue on, you carry the memory of bodies pressed together, voices overlapping, and the brief sense that history can tilt without warning. You do not know when the next gathering will form, only that it will, and that you may find yourself standing in it again before you have time to decide. Night falls unevenly, and with it comes a tension that feels sharper than anything you experienced in daylight. The cold deepens, sounds carry farther. Footsteps echo in ways that make you turn your head more often than necessary. You're aware that something is happening even before you understand what it is. You are near King Street, drawn there by instinct or accident, it is hard to say. The street is narrow, bordered by tall buildings that trap noise and shadow. Lamps glow weakly, throwing circles of light that do little to soften the darkness between them. Snow lingers in dirty patches, hardened by repeated footsteps. Anyone living in Boston at this time already knows that soldiers and civilians clash verbally with unsettling frequency. Insults pass back and forth. Snowballs fly. Names are exchanged that cannot be taken back. Tonight feels like another version of that pattern until it is not. You hear voices raised, not shouting yet, but tense. A crowd gathers with alarming speed, familiar now in its formation. You edge closer, not to participate, but to understand. Curiosity and caution wrestle inside you. A sentry stands rigid, musket in hand, back near the customs house. Others join him. Their posture shifts from bored to alert. Someone yells something you cannot fully make out. Another voice responds louder, angrier. The air feels brittle, like it might shatter if struck too hard. It was later recorded that on March 5th, 1770, a confrontation here ended with British soldiers firing into a crowd, killing 5 colonists. That fact will harden into a name, the Boston Massacre, but right now there is no label, no narrative, only confusion unfolding in real time. You notice how quickly events outrun intention. Orders are shouted. You cannot tell who they are meant for. The crowd presses closer, then hesitates. Someone throws something. Ice. Wood. You flinch at the sound of it striking a uniform. The soldiers look frightened. This detail matters, though it is often forgotten. Fear moves faster than discipline. Musket barrels lift not smoothly, but jerkily. You feel your own breath catch, mirroring theirs. There has long been disagreement among historians about whether the soldiers were ordered to fire or acted independently under pressure. From where you stand, the distinction feels academic. What matters is the sound that follows. The crack of gunfire splits the night. Once, then again. The sound ricochets off walls louder than you expect. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then everything moves at once. You see bodies fall. You hear screams. Someone drops beside you and you step back instinctively, heart pounding. Blood darkens the snow in a way that feels unreal, like a stage effect gone wrong. This is not how confrontations are supposed to end. A detail that rarely makes it into simple retellings becomes painfully clear. The street itself amplifies chaos, narrow space, poor visibility, echoes that confuse direction. Panic feeds on environment as much as emotion. The crowd scatters unevenly. Some rush forward, others flee. You find yourself pressed against a wall, struggling to orient. Soldiers shout. Someone calls for help. The smell of gunpowder burns your nose. Eventually order returns in fragments. Bells ring. Officials arrive. The wounded are carried away. The dead lie still. Their presence heavier than any argument you have heard before. Interpretations still diverge on whether this moment radicalized Boston overnight or merely accelerated a process already underway. Standing here afterward, you feel less transformed than stunned. Shock does not clarify, it suspends. You walk home slowly, avoiding the main street. Every sound makes you tense. The city feels altered, though it looks the same. Lamps still burn, doors still close, yet something essential has shifted. Inside your home, voices are low. People speak in fragments, replaying what they heard, what they think they saw. Accounts differ already. Memory is forming even as facts blur. A curious but telling habit emerges in the hours that follow. People clean compulsively, hands, floors, tools, as if order in small things might restore order in larger ones. It does not, but the effort soothes. Sleep comes badly. When it comes at all, the sound of gunfire repeats in your mind, sharper than the bells. You replay moments, wondering what could have changed the outcome. A word, a pause, a step backward. By morning, the event has a name. Pamphlets will print it. Images will dramatize it. The story will harden quickly, but you carry something less tidy. The memory of fear moving faster than reason. Some later scholars have pointed out that the term massacre itself was a political choice, shaping perception as much as reporting fact. Others argue the name fit the emotional truth of the moment regardless of numbers. You understand now that language will struggle to contain what happened. As dawn lightens the sky, you step outside again. The street has been cleared. Snow looks ordinary. The customs house stands unchanged, yet you cannot unsee what the night placed there. You realise that this moment will echo forward, reshaping conversations, hardening positions, and narrowing options. It has taken something vague and made it visceral. You do not yet know where this leads. War still feels distant, but innocence has thinned. Trust has fractured. The city has crossed an invisible line, and there is no way to step back over it. As you move through the morning, people meet one another's eyes differently. Something has been shared that cannot be undone. The night has marked you and Boston in ways that will not fade quietly. Morning arrives carrying the weight of what happened, even though it looks much like any other. Light slips between buildings. Smoke rises from chimneys. Carts begin their familiar routes. Yet the city moves differently now, as if everyone is testing the ground before committing their full weight to it. You step outside and feel it immediately. Voices are lower. Eye contact lasts longer. People pause before speaking, not out of fear exactly, but out of care. Words feel heavier than they did yesterday. You sense that everyone is measuring how much of the night can be said aloud without reopening the wound. By now, no one in Boston needs an official notice to know that something irreversible has occurred. 5 men are dead. That knowledge does not need repetition. It sits in the air, unspoken, shaping each interaction. Shops open, but later than usual. Work resumes, but without its usual rhythm. You walk past the site where it happened. The street has been cleared. Snow has been shoveled. Any visible trace has been erased with efficiency that feels almost deliberate. Yet the absence draws your attention more sharply than any stain would have. You slow without meaning to. People stop here briefly, then move on. No one lingers too long. Standing still feels inappropriate, as if attention itself might disturb something fragile. You notice how quickly grief becomes private when public expression feels uncertain. Printed notices appear within hours. Statements, testimonies, appeals to calm. The city responds with paper because paper feels controllable. Words can be arranged. Events cannot. You read one notice carefully, then fold it away, unsure what you are meant to do with it. There is still no settled agreement among those who later study this moment about how immediate the shift in public feeling truly was. Some accounts describe an instant hardening. Others suggest a quieter transformation. From inside the day itself, it feels like suspension. Nothing rushes forward yet. Everything waits. You overhear conversations that begin with facts and drift into speculation. Who fired first? Who shouted what? Whether it could have ended differently. Each retelling adjusts details not out of malice, but because memory is already reorganizing itself around meaning. A subtle change creeps into behaviour. People begin keeping doors closed longer than usual. Shutters are drawn earlier. Candles are lit before darkness fully settles. These gestures are not mandated. They spread because they feel sensible. Churches fill more than they did last week, not with loud prayer, but with quiet presence. People sit longer than necessary, letting the stillness hold them. Sermons choose words carefully. Scripture offers language for restraint, patience, endurance. The message is clear even when it is not explicit. You notice an easily overlooked detail while walking home. Children no longer play in the street as freely. They stay closer to doorways. Games quiet themselves. Someone has told them enough to make caution feel natural. The soldiers remain visible, but their posture has changed. They stand farther apart. Their movements are more formal. There is a sense that everyone is being watched by everyone else, each side unsure what the next step should look like. Looking back, historians have struggled to agree on whether this moment reduced the likelihood of compromise or briefly renewed it. There are arguments for both. Living through it, you sense exhaustion more than fury. Anger will come later. Right now, the city is tired. The funerals draw crowds that are quiet and tightly held together. Processions move slowly. Hats are removed. Even those who disagreed politically stand along the route. Death collapses difference, at least for a moment. A habit forms that no one names. People begin storing pamphlets rather than passing them on. Words are saved, not circulated, as if holding onto them might offer control over what happens next. Work continues, but concentration wavers. Tools slip. Hands pause mid-task. Thoughts return to the street. You catch yourself staring without seeing, replaying sounds you wish you could forget. At night, sleep remains shallow. Dreams break apart easily. You wake at the smallest noise. The city does too. Patrols pass more frequently. Lantern light moves across walls like restless thoughts. It becomes clear that the calm you are experiencing is not resolution. It is a pause created by shock. Everyone senses it, even if no one articulates it. Conversations circle the same points, never quite landing. You begin to understand that this quiet may be the most dangerous moment of all. Anger has not disappeared. It has gathered itself inward, waiting for language, waiting for direction. As the days pass, the memory of the gunfire does not fade. It sharpens. Each retelling strips away uncertainty and replaces it with conviction. Nuance slips. Edges harden. You move through the city aware that ordinary life has resumed only in appearance. Beneath it, decisions are forming. Loyalties are being weighed. Lines are being drawn quietly, one conversation at a time. And as you extinguish your candle and lie down once more, you sense that the city is holding its breath again. Not with confusion this time, but with anticipation. Something has ended, even if nothing new has yet begun. Dusk returns with a familiarity that feels almost comforting, even as it carries new weight. You sit with family, or those who pass for family, here, people bound more by proximity than blood. The room is dim. The fire is low. Supper has been eaten, plates scraped clean without comment. Now comes the part of the evening where words matter most, and therefore are chosen carefully. Conversation begins with ordinary things: the cost of flour, a neighbour's illness, the condition of the roof after the last storm. These topics serve as a gentle warm-up, easing everyone into the shared space. You can feel when the shift is coming, when someone will test whether tonight is a night for heavier truths. By now, everyone around this table already understands that silence is no longer neutral. Not speaking feels like a choice. Speaking feels like risk. The balance between them is negotiated with glances, pauses, and half-finished sentences. Someone finally mentions the events of the night that changed everything, but not directly. They say the street's name, or they mention a funeral time. The rest follows without needing explanation. You feel the room tighten, not with fear, but with attention. Opinions surface cautiously. A brother-in-law speaks of injustice. An older relative counters with warnings about consequences. A younger voice asks a question that stops everyone cold, because no one has an answer that feels safe or honest. What happens next? There is no settled agreement among later commentators about how unified families were during this period, and sitting here, you understand why. Allegiances fracture along lines that have nothing to do with affection, loyalty to the crown, loyalty to livelihood, loyalty to the hope that things might calm down if everyone simply waits. A practical detail shapes these conversations more than ideology ever could. People worry about food rent and safety first. Grand principles follow later, if at all. You notice how often arguments circle back to who will suffer most if violence escalates. Children, the elderly, those with the least to spare. Someone lowers their voice even though the walls are familiar. Sound travels. Neighbours listen without meaning to. A careless remark could move beyond this room by morning. You learn to speak in generalities to imply rather than declare. An easily missed habit appears. People begin to clear the table slowly even after the meal is finished. Dishes are wiped twice. Cups are rearranged. Movement fills the space words leave empty. This gives everyone time to think, to retreat from statements that might otherwise solidify. Faith enters the discussion not as doctrine, but as reassurance. Someone recalls a sermon. Another mentions prayer. These references are not calls to obedience, so much as requests for stability. Belief offers language when politics feels too sharp. Looking back, scholars have found it difficult to determine whether such household conversations push people toward action or reinforced caution. From inside, the moment they feel like pressure valves, they allow fear and hope to coexist without exploding. Children listen even when they pretend not to. You notice their stillness, the way their eyes track speakers. They absorb tone more than content, learning when voices harden and when they soften. This is education of a different sort. A strange but telling adjustment becomes common. Families begin planning contingencies aloud. Where to go if trouble spreads? Who might offer shelter? What can be sold quickly if money runs short? These plans are spoken lightly, almost jokingly, but they linger after laughter fades. Disagreement does not always end cleanly. Sometimes voices rise. Sometimes someone leaves the room abruptly. These moments feel heavier than arguments ever did before, because reconciliation is no longer guaranteed by habit. You sense generational divides sharpening. Those who remember earlier conflicts urge patience. Those who have known only tightening control bristle at delay. Experience and expectation pull in opposite directions. Eventually, fatigue wins. Words thin out. People retreat to corners of the room or to their beds. The fire burns lower. Candles are pinched out carefully to preserve tallow. As you lie down, the voices echo faintly in your mind. Not specific phrases, but emotional residue, concern, resolve, uncertainty. These are not passing moods. They settle in becoming part of how you will approach tomorrow. In the darkness, you replay moments you wish you had phrased differently. A hesitation, a sharper tone than intended. You wonder how these conversations will be remembered, or if they will be forgotten entirely in the rush of events to come. Some later observers have suggested that revolutions begin not in streets or taverns, but around tables like this where private doubts slowly align. Others argue that such moments merely reflect larger forces already in motion. You cannot see far enough ahead to judge. You only know that something has shifted inside this room and inside you. Sleep comes unevenly. You drift in and out, listening to the house settle. A board creaks. Someone coughs. Outside, a distant patrol passes, lantern light brushing the window briefly. Morning will bring work errands, obligations. It always does. But these evening conversations will accompany you, shaping how you hear the city and interpret its signs. As you close your eyes, you accept that there will be no easy consensus, not here, not anywhere. What there will be instead are choices made quietly, one household at a time, long before anyone dares to call them history. You begin to notice how much of the city's weight is carried quietly by women, often without comment, and rarely with recognition. The streets look the same at first glance, but your attention shifts. You see who opens shop shutters each morning, who balances ledgers while minding children, who keeps households functioning even as uncertainty presses in from every direction. By the early 1770s, it has become normal for women in Boston to manage businesses, especially when husbands are at sea ill or absent. This is not an exception born of crisis, it is routine practice competence. Shops selling cloth candles, food or small goods rely on women's labour and judgment every day. You watch a woman negotiate with a supplier, her tone calm but firm. She knows prices, she knows margins, she knows when to push and when to wait. The exchange is brief and efficient. There is no audience, no applause. The transaction simply happens, and the city continues to function. At-home work never truly pauses. Cooking, mending, cleaning and childcare fill the hours between public tasks. These duties overlap rather than separate, creating a rhythm that leaves little room for rest. You notice how hands move almost automatically, performing skilled work, while conversation flows alongside. A small, easily overlooked habit reveals itself. Women often keep mental inventories rather than written ones. How much flour remains? How long the candles will last? Which garments are close to wearing through? This constant calculation shapes decisions quietly and relentlessly. Political resistance enters these spaces in subtle ways, choosing not to buy certain goods, stretching supplies longer than intended, teaching children new habits without explaining why. These acts do not look dramatic, but they accumulate impact over time. There remains disagreement among later historians about how consciously women frame these choices as political. Some argue intention mattered less than effect. Others caution against reading modern categories backward. From where you stand, the distinction feels distant. Necessity guides action first. Meaning follows. You notice women gathering together not always in formal meetings, but in shared labour, sewing circles, market errands, laundry work. Information moves easily through these networks, carried alongside practical advice. News is exchanged between stitches and scrubbing motions. One detail that official records rarely capture becomes obvious. Women remember things, names, incidents, promises made and broken. This memory becomes a kind of informal archive, shaping how communities respond to authority and change. You see how emotional labour underpins everything, calming children, reassuring neighbours, mediating disputes within households. This work does not leave visible marks, yet without it, tension would snap far more quickly. Some scholars have pointed out that women's influence during this period often appeared indirect because open political participation was restricted. Others suggest that this very restriction forced creativity, embedding resistance in daily routines. Living alongside it, you sense adaptability rather than strategy. In moments of crisis, women often become the first responders, tending wounds, offering shelter, managing scarcity. These responses are not framed as heroism, they are framed as obligation. You notice how public protests rely on private preparation, clean clothes for demonstrations, food packed discreetly, messages passed along through family connections. Without these supports, public action would falter. A curious adjustment takes hold as tension grows. Women begin teaching children songs and rhymes with layered meanings. On the surface, they are playful. Beneath that, they carry memory and attitude. Culture moves forward disguised as routine. Even disagreements over loyalty play out differently here. Arguments are tempered by practical concerns: how to protect the household, how to avoid unnecessary risk. Ideals are weighed against consequences with relentless realism. As evening approaches, women are often the last to rest. Fires banked, doors checked, tomorrow anticipated. Their awareness stretches forward, scanning for what might be needed next. Looking back, interpretations still diverge over how central women were to sustaining resistance in Boston. Some narratives minimize their role, others elevate it. From your position inside daily life, the question feels misplaced. Without this labour, nothing else could hold. You move through the city with this new awareness, noticing how often stability depends on unseen effort. The revolution that will later be named and celebrated is being supported quietly, thread by thread, meal by meal. As night settles in again, you recognise that history often remembers voices raised in public squares. What it forgets are the hands that made those moments possible. Here, those hands are everywhere, steady and persistent. You lie down carrying that knowledge with you. It softens the noise of the city, reframing it. Change here is not only loud and sudden, it is patient, domestic, and deeply human. Children move through this city differently than adults do. You begin to notice it once you pay attention. They are lower to the ground, closer to boots and hems and dropped crumbs of conversation. They hear more than people think. They understand more than anyone intends. In the morning, you see them running errands that matter, carrying notes, delivering small bundles, fetching water. They weave through streets with ease, memorizing which corners feel safe and which feel tense. Their bodies learn the city the way yours has, through repetition rather than instruction. No one needs to explain danger to them anymore. They feel it in how adults speak, in the way voices drop when certain words approach, in the sudden stillness that follows the sound of boots. Caution is absorbed, not taught. Schooling happens when it can. Some children attend formal lessons. Others learn letters at kitchen tables or in the back rooms of shops. Education here is irregular, shaped by labour needs and household stability. A child who can read aloud becomes useful quickly, reading notices, letters or pamphlets to adults who cannot. You notice how political language filters downward in fragments, not full arguments, just phrases. Rights, fairness, liberty. These words appear in games repeated without full understanding, yet charged with tone. Children try them out the way they try on adult postures. A strange adjustment settles into play. Games that once involved chasing or climbing shift toward imitation, marching, calling orders, staging mock confrontations. Someone always plays the soldier. Someone always plays the crowd. The rules change, often reflecting whatever was overheard most recently. You catch yourself correcting a child too sharply for a careless comment. The reaction surprises you. You realise that speech itself has become something to manage even among the young, Words feel heavier now, capable of consequences. At home, children listen from doorways during evening conversations. They pretend to be absorbed in toys or chores, but their attention is sharp. They notice which topics make adults uneasy, which provoke arguments, which end discussions abruptly. Memory forms early here. Children remember events through sensation, loud noises, sudden silences, the feel of being pulled indoors quickly. These impressions settle deeper than explanations ever could. Some later observers would struggle to agree on how politically aware children truly were during this period. But awareness does not require theory, it requires pattern recognition, and children excel at that. You notice another small shift. Parents begin teaching children practical self-restraint. Do not stare. Do not repeat what you hear. Do not ask certain questions in public. These lessons are delivered gently, but with urgency beneath them. Chores increase. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Children learn to contribute earlier, to carry more responsibility than seems fair by modern standards. The city asks more of everyone now. There is tenderness in these moments too. Adults linger longer when saying goodnight. Hands rest on shoulders more often. Stories are told with softer endings. Comfort becomes deliberate. In the street you see children adjusting instinctively to crowds. They stand closer to walls. They hold hands when things feel unpredictable. They sense when gatherings might turn sharp and retreat before being told. A detail that becomes obvious only after days of watching is how children serve as messengers between households. They move unnoticed, carrying news that adults hesitate to share directly. Their presence feels harmless. Their role is anything but. You hear a child recite a rhyme that has changed slightly from the version you remember. Words added. Emphasis shifted. The meaning is subtle but there. Culture adapts even at this level, slipping past authority in forms too small to regulate. Fear expresses itself differently in children. Some become quieter, others louder, some cling, others wander. There is no single response. Each child finds a way to fit fear into their understanding of the world. Even sleep changes. Children wake more easily. Night noises linger longer. They ask questions in the dark that have no easy answers. You learn to reassure without promising what you cannot guarantee. Looking back, people would argue endlessly about how much these early impressions shaped later convictions. Some would claim that childhood exposure hardened resolve. Others would suggest that adult experience mattered more. Living alongside it, you suspect the answer varies with the child. You watch a group of children pause their play as soldiers pass. They fall silent without instruction. When the soldiers move on, the game resumes, altered slightly. Authority passes through their world like weather. Adults often underestimate how much children notice. You stop making that mistake. You see how they catalogue expressions, tone, body language. They learn who feels safe and who does not. As days pass, children begin asking fewer questions and offering more observations. They report what they see, who spoke with whom, which streets feel different. Their awareness becomes another layer of information circulating through the city. There is sadness in this, but also resilience. Children adapt because they must. They find ways to play, to laugh, to belong, even as the world around them tightens. As evening settles, you listen to their breathing as they sleep. It steadies the room. You hope that rest will soften what the day has etched into them. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. You understand now that the revolution unfolding here is not only shaping laws and loyalties, It is shaping childhood itself, teaching lessons earlier than intended, demanding maturity sooner than planned. As you drift towards sleep yourself, you carry that awareness gently. The city continues to teach its youngest residents quietly and relentlessly, and they in turn absorb it, shaping a future no one can yet see clearly. You begin to notice the paper before you notice the words. It is everywhere now, folded into pockets, tucked behind beams, passed hand to hand with a familiarity that feels newly earned. Paper moves through Boston almost as freely as breath, carrying arguments, rumours and reassurances in equal measure. Someone presses a pamphlet into your palm as you pass. The gesture is casual, almost careless, but the eyes that meet yours are alert. You nod once and keep walking, not opening it until you are safely indoors. Reading has become a private act again, something done away from windows and doorways. Once inside, you unfold the sheet carefully. The paper is thin, the ink uneven. It smells faintly of oil and metal. Printing is still a labour-intensive process, and it shows. Letters blur slightly at the edges. Lines crowd together. Yet the urgency behind the words cuts through every imperfection. You read slowly, not because the language is difficult, but because the ideas ask to be weighed. Claims are made boldly. Accusations are framed as reason. Appeals are dressed as common sense. You recognise the voice of persuasion immediately. It does not shout, it invites agreement. By now it has become normal for printed arguments to circulate faster than official responses. Printers work late. Presses run quietly in back rooms. Pamphlets appear before authorities can decide how to respond. Paper has become a way to outrun power without moving your feet. You notice how often these texts speak directly to you, not as a subject, not as a spectator, as a participant. The language uses familiar phrases, everyday examples. It builds a bridge between abstract grievance and lived frustration. A curious habit forms as you read. You begin mouthing certain lines, silently testing how they sound. Some phrases feel right immediately. Others catch. You mark them mentally, wondering how they might land if spoken aloud. You do not always agree with what you read. Some arguments feel stretched. Some claims feel exaggerated. Yet even disagreement sharpens attention. The pamphlet has done its job by making you think beyond the immediate moment. Later generations will argue endlessly about which texts mattered most, and which merely echoed louder voices. From where you sit, influence feels cumulative rather than singular. One pamphlet alone might be dismissed. Dozens form a chorus that is harder to ignore. You hear others discussing the same text sometimes without realizing it. Phrases repeat in conversation. Ideas migrate from paper to speech seamlessly. Someone who cannot read repeats an argument word for word, having heard it spoken in a tavern or at a market stall. A detail that becomes obvious only with time is how reading shifts posture. People lean in closer, shoulders hunch, bodies curl protectively around pages. Reading feels intimate, almost conspiratorial. You begin saving pamphlets instead of discarding them, folding them carefully, hiding them under loose boards or inside chests. They become reference points, evidence reminders. Not all are meant to be reread. Some are kept simply because discarding them feels wrong. Children watch adults read with fascination. They sense importance, even when they do not grasp content. You notice them tracing letters with fingers, asking questions about words they hear repeated often. Liberty, power, rights, these terms lodge early. Printing shops become quiet centres of gravity. People pass by them more often than necessary, glancing, engaging activity. The presses themselves are not loud, but their potential is felt keenly. Ink stains mark hands and aprons, visible signs of participation. You notice how quickly counter-arguments appear. Authority responds with its own printed notices, attempting to steady the narrative. These texts feel different, more formal, less intimate. They speak at rather than with. The contrast is not lost on readers. At night you read passages by candlelight, not seeking new information but reassurance. Seeing the words again steadies you. They confirm that your unease is shared, that your questions are not isolated. A subtle change occurs in how people quote these texts. Attribution fades. Phrases become communal. Ownership dissolves. What matters is not who wrote it, but that it resonates. Some observers later would suggest that pamphlets created unity where little existed. Others would argue they simply reflected sentiments already present. Sitting here with ink smudging your fingers, you feel less concerned with origins than with effect. The city sounds different now. Conversations carry sharper edges. Silence carries heavier meaning. You also notice fatigue creeping in. Reading too much too quickly overwhelms. Some days you avoid pamphlets, entirely needing a break from persuasion. Other days you seek them out, craving clarity. As weeks pass, pamphlets begin referencing one another. Arguments build upon arguments. A layered conversation unfolds across time and paper. You follow it imperfectly, catching fragments, missing others. The act of reading becomes a quiet form of participation. You may never speak in a crowd or confront an official, but absorbing these ideas reshapes how you interpret every interaction. Paper has altered your internal landscape. When you finally set the pamphlet aside, you do not feel resolved. You feel engaged. Awake in a new way. The words linger, echoing through your thoughts as you move through the city. You step outside again, the folded paper hidden against your chest. The street looks unchanged, but it no longer feels neutral. Every sign, every notice, every spoken phrase now connects to a larger argument unfolding just beneath the surface. You realise that this flood of words has done something subtle and irreversible. It has taught you to frame your experience, to place your discomfort inside a story that extends beyond your own life. As evening settles once more, you tuck the pamphlet away. You do not know if it will matter in the long run, but tonight it has given shape to thoughts you did not yet know how to hold, and that feels like the beginning of something that cannot be easily undone. You notice how the city's churches feel differently now, not louder, not more dramatic, simply fuller, especially in the pauses between words. You take a seat on a hard bench and let the stillness settle around you, aware that this space has become one of the few places where large groups gather without immediately drawing suspicion. The air inside smells of cold stone wall coats and faint candle smoke. Footsteps echo softly. People arrive early and leave slowly. Sermons are delivered with careful balance, as if each sentence has been weighed before being allowed into the room. By now, it is simply understood that churches are more than spiritual centres. They are places where the community hears itself think. Ministers know this. They choose language that can be read multiple ways, offering guidance without issuing instructions. You listen closely. Scripture is familiar, but emphasis has shifted. Words about justice, patience, endurance, and moral responsibility linger longer than they used to. No one names current events directly. That is not necessary. Everyone recognises the alignment, A detail you might miss if you are not sitting still is how people respond physically. Heads nod almost imperceptibly. Hands tighten briefly around hymn books. Breathing changes during certain passages. Agreement expresses itself quietly here. Faith provides vocabulary when politics feels too sharp to handle openly. It allows people to frame resistance as conscience rather than defiance, or restraint as wisdom rather than fear. This flexibility keeps the peace, at least within these walls. Children sit beside adults, fidgeting less than usual. Even they sense the gravity. They learn early that certain spaces require attentiveness, that meaning can be carried in tone as much as in content. Outside the church, conversations continue in clusters. People discuss the sermon without discussing it. Phrases are repeated selectively. Interpretation becomes a communal act. Someone suggests the message called for patience. Someone else hears a warning against submission. No one insists on being right. Looking back from a distance, it is difficult to say whether clergy were leading opinion or reflecting it. The line blurs easily. What you feel is resonance. Words spoken here align with thoughts already forming elsewhere. You notice that attendance varies by neighbourhood. Some churches lean toward calm, others hum with quiet intensity. Ministers differ in style, in background, in tolerance for risk. These differences matter even if they are never acknowledged aloud. At home, later fragments of sermons reappear in conversation. A phrase about stewardship, a line about obedience tempered by conscience. Scripture becomes a shared reference point, grounding discussions that might otherwise spin apart. There is also comfort here, routine, familiar hymns, the predictability of order. When the world feels unstable, ritual reassures. You sing softly, letting the sound settle into your chest. It steadies your breathing. A small behavioural shift becomes noticeable over time. People linger longer after services, reluctant to disperse. The churchyard fills with quiet exchanges. News travels here in gentler tones than it does in taverns or markets. You realise that faith offers a way to process fear without surrendering to it. It acknowledges suffering without demanding immediate action. It allows space for waiting even when waiting feels unbearable. Some later commentators would argue that religion acted as a brake on revolution. Others would claim it provided moral justification for resistance. Sitting through these services, you sense something less binary. Faith holds tension rather than resolving it. You also notice who does not attend. Absence becomes visible. People take note without remarking on it. Attendance itself becomes a signal, however unintended. At night, prayers are spoken differently. More pauses, fewer assumptions. Requests shift from prosperity to safety, from success to clarity. You find yourself repeating the same lines, not because you expect answers, but because repetition soothes. The language of sermons slips into pamphlets, into speeches, into everyday speech. Metaphors migrate. Moral framing spreads. Words once confined to pulpits now appear in conversations at the market. You understand now that religion here is not separate from daily life. It weaves through it, offering structure when other structures feel unreliable. It does not dictate choices so much as shape how choices are justified. As days pass, sermons respond subtly to events. A death, a rumour, a rising tension. The minister adjusts emphasis without explanation. The congregation adjusts with him, attuned to nuance. Children ask questions after services. Adults answer carefully. Some answers are honest, others are evasive. Both teach something. When you lie down at night, phrases from sermons drift through your thoughts. Not commands, reflections. They slow your thinking, soften sharp edges. You recognize that faith here is not about certainty, it is about endurance, about holding together long enough to see what comes next. It offers a language for patience without erasing anger. As the city continues to shift, churches remain steady points, not neutral but measured, not silent but careful. They absorb anxiety and release it slowly in controlled doses. You fall asleep with the sense that belief itself is being tested and reshaped, stretched to accommodate a world no longer behaving as expected. Faith does not resolve the conflict. It teaches you how to live inside it. You notice the change first at the table. The cup in your hand is different. The ritual remains the pause, the warmth, the shared moment, but the contents have shifted. Tea once unquestioned now feels deliberate, or avoided entirely. What you drink has begun to say something about you even if you never intended it to. Mornings still begin the same way. Fires coaxed back to life. Water heated slowly. Bread broken rather than sliced. Yet the familiar comfort of tea has become complicated. Its absence sits louder than its presence ever did. You reach for alternatives that feel wrong at first. Herbal infusions, warm milk, anything that fills the space without carrying the same weight. This adjustment spreads quietly. You notice it when visiting others. Cups offered with a slight hesitation, explanations given before questions are asked. No one lectures, no one demands. The change travels by example, not instruction. It has become ordinary to see tea leaves stretched far beyond their prime, reused until colour barely clouds the water. This thrift once signalled care. Now it signals something else. Restraint, alignment, a willingness to accept inconvenience as statement. You overhear a conversation where someone jokes about craving tea the way one might crave sugar. Laughter follows, but it is thinner than usual. Desire has become suspect. Comfort now carries moral weight. At the market, imported goods draw longer looks. Fingers hover before touching. Some items are passed over without comment. Others are bought discreetly. Choice feels exposed. You realise how quickly consumption turns public when meaning attaches to it. Clothing changes too. Homespun appears more often, its rough texture visible even at a distance. It's not always comfortable. It does not always last. Yet wearing it feels purposeful. Fabric becomes language thread by thread. You catch yourself smoothing a sleeve, aware of how it might be read. You had never thought about clothing this way before. Now it feels unavoidable. The body becomes a billboard, whether you want it to or not. Meals adapt. Ingredients are substituted. Recipes simplify. Some flavours disappear entirely, others gain importance. Salted foods dominate. Preservation becomes priority. Eating turns pragmatic, again stripped of small luxuries. You notice how children react. They ask where certain foods went. Adults answer vaguely, sometimes with humour, sometimes with silence. Children learn that absence itself can be meaningful. In private, frustration surfaces. People complain softly about what they miss, about how tiring it is to think this much about ordinary things. The complaint is followed almost immediately by a justification, as if discomfort requires defence. A small habit emerges that surprises you. People begin praising substitutes out loud. This drink is better anyway. This cloth lasts longer. This food tastes richer. Whether or not it is true seems beside the point. Saying it helps make it so. You realise that resistance here is not dramatic. It is repetitive. It asks you to choose again and again, even when tired. Especially when tired. At night, you notice how often hands reach for familiar comforts out of reflex, then stop mid-motion. The pause matters. It marks awareness. Awareness is exhausting, but it's also contagious. Visitors from outside the city stand out now. Their habits betray them. The wrong cup, the wrong coat, the wrong assumption. They are not confronted. They are observed. Observation carries judgment quietly. You sense impatience growing beneath these daily adjustments. Small sacrifices are bearable. Endless ones great. People begin to ask, not aloud, but internally, how long this can last. Still the routines hold. They persist because they are visible and manageable. You can control what you eat, what you wear, what you buy. When larger forces feel immovable, these choices offer traction. You recognise the irony. Empire presses from afar, yet response begins at the table, in the closet, at the market stall. Power feels distant. Agency feels immediate. As evening settles, you prepare a drink that still does not quite satisfy. You sip it slowly anyway. The warmth spreads. The absence remains. You understand now that boycotts do not live in proclamations. They live in repetition, in choosing the harder option until it becomes familiar. When you lie down, you think about how many decisions filled your day that once required none. Fatigue hums beneath thought. Yet beneath that, something steadier forms. A sense that these small acts are knitting people together quietly, persistently. Tomorrow will ask the same of you, and you will respond not because it is easy, but because it has become part of how you move through the world now. You begin to feel it before you consciously notice it. The way people look at you, the way you look at them. Clothing has started speaking in a language that does not require words, and once you become aware of it, you cannot stop hearing what it says. Walking through the street, you register texture before colour, coarse wool, rough linen, fabric that does not drape so much as hold its shape stubbornly. Homespun appears again and again, not because it is attractive, but because it is legible. It tells a story that others can read at a glance. You adjust your own clothing without thinking. Straighten a cuff. Smooth a seam. The gesture is small, but it carries intention. You are no longer dressing only for warmth or modesty. You are dressing to be understood. There was a time when imported cloth signaled success. Fine weave, soft finish, a visible connection to trade routes that stretched across the Atlantic. Now those same qualities invite scrutiny. You notice glances lingering a beat too long on anyone who seems too comfortable, too polished. Tailors adapt quickly. They offer simpler cuts, fewer embellishments. Repairs become more common than replacements. A garment with visible mending no longer signals poverty alone. It signals endurance. Practicality gains prestige. You overhear someone compliment a jacket, not for its style, but for where it was made. The praise lands differently than fashion ever did. Origin matters more than appearance. Provenance outweighs elegance. At home, clothing care takes on new urgency. Garments are aired carefully, washed sparingly, repaired repeatedly. You learn the feel of your clothes intimately, knowing which threads will give first, which patches need reinforcing soon. A small, almost unconscious habit forms. People begin touching their own sleeves while listening to others speak, as if grounding themselves in the message their clothing sends. The body participates in communication, whether invited or not. Children absorb this language quickly. They notice differences. They ask why certain clothes are worn on certain days. Answers are partial. Because it lasts. Because it is better. Because this is what we wear now. The explanation feels sufficient even when incomplete. You notice how public gatherings look different. Crowds appear more uniform, not by decree, but by convergence. Similar fabrics, similar tones. The visual effect is subtle but powerful. Difference does not disappear, it quiets. Some people resist. They continue wearing imported garments, either out of habit or defiance. Reactions vary. Some admire the boldness. Others bristle. Clothing has become opinion made visible, and not everyone agrees on how it should read. You feel the tension this creates. Clothing used to be personal. Now it feels interpretive. You cannot control how others read you, only how carefully you choose. You catch yourself hesitating before stepping outside, weighing which coat to wear. The warmer one or the more appropriate one? Comfort or message? The fact that this calculation exists at all surprises you. Inside shops, mirrors reflect more than faces. They reflect alignment. You turn slightly, examining how you appear from different angles, not out of vanity, but awareness. The street responds. You feel it. A nod here, a lingering look there. Approval and disapproval travel without sound. The city has learned to read itself. As days pass, clothing loses novelty as statement and becomes default again. What once felt symbolic settles into normalcy. The language fades into background noise, still present, but no longer startling. You realise this is how change embeds itself. Loud at first, then habitual, then invisible. At night, you fold your clothes carefully, stacking them where they will be ready tomorrow. The act feels intentional now, preparation rather than routine. You think about how many revolutions will later be described in speeches and documents. Few will mention fabric. Fewer still will mention how it felt to choose what to wear, knowing it would be read as belief. Lying down, you picture the street as it looked today. The muted tones, the shared texture, the quiet agreement stitched together without planning. Clothing has not caused unity, but it has made it visible. It has allowed people to recognize one another without speaking. In uncertain times, recognition matters. As sleep approaches, the weight of the day eases. Tomorrow will ask you to dress again, to choose again, to step into the city, carrying meaning you never asked for. You will do it anyway, because now even getting dressed has become part of how you live inside this moment, and there is no returning to innocence about it. Night changes the city in ways daylight never manages. Shapes soften, sounds stretch, intentions feel harder to read. You move more carefully now, aware that darkness has begun to belong to rumour as much as reality. You hear about the watches before you see them. Quiet groups moving through streets at irregular intervals. Men who volunteer or are chosen carrying lanterns that sway gently, casting uncertain light. They are not soldiers, they are neighbours. That distinction matters even when it feels thin. It has become normal for people to organise themselves after sunset. Not formally, not loudly, just enough to feel less exposed. Doors are checked twice, windows are shuttered earlier. Someone lingers outside longer than necessary, listening before heading in. You step into the street and feel the difference immediately. Conversations shorten, footsteps sound louder. You sense attention where there might be none. The city feels awake in a way that is not energetic but alert. Lantern light creates pockets of visibility rather than clarity. Faces appear, then vanish. You recognize silhouettes more than features. Identity becomes approximate. Trust relies on familiarity of movement rather than certainty of face. You notice a habit forming. People clear their throats softly before approaching others at night. It is a signal, a way of announcing presence without startling. This small courtesy spreads quickly unspoken and soon feels essential. Whispers travel faster after dark. Stories pick up details they lacked during the day. A ship spotted, a patrol moving differently, a neighbour questioned. Accuracy matters less than momentum. Night amplifies uncertainty. You feel it in your body. Shoulders slightly raised, steps measured. Breathing shallow until you reach a familiar doorway. Even familiar streets demand caution now. The city you know becomes provisional in shadow. Some nights bring tension. Raised voices, a sudden gathering, the sound of running feet. Other nights pass quietly, their unease expressed only in vigilance. You never know which kind you will get. You realise that fear behaves differently at night. It becomes collective. During the day, worry feels personal. After dark, it feels shared. Everyone seems to be listening for the same things. Children are kept indoors more strictly now. Bedtimes enforced earlier. Stories told longer to keep them settled. Night has acquired a reputation, and reputation alone is enough to reshape routine. You hear the watch pass your street. Lanterns bob. Voices murmur. Someone calls out the hour. The sound is meant to reassure, and it does, but it also reminds you how much reassurance is needed. A strange comfort emerges in this vigilance. Knowing someone is awake, knowing attention is being paid. It does not erase risk, but it makes it feel manageable. You catch yourself participating without being asked, lingering near the window, listening longer than before, mentally noting who passes and who does not. Awareness becomes habit. Later you learn that different neighbourhoods handle night differently. Some rely on familiar faces, others prefer distance. Each approach reflects what the community fears most. Sleep becomes fragmented. You drift off, then wake at sounds you once ignored. A cart, a shout, wind against shutters. You lie still deciding whether to move or wait. In the morning, people compare impressions rather than events. Did you hear that? Did you see the light near the corner? Consensus forms slowly pieced together from partial experiences. Looking back later, it'll be hard to say whether night watches prevented danger or simply made people feel less alone in it. What matters now is that they exist and that they change how darkness feels. You notice how quickly this adjustment settles into routine. What once felt extraordinary becomes expected. Night is no longer a pause. It is another phase of participation. As you finally fall asleep again, you do so knowing that someone else is awake somewhere nearby, lantern in hand, listening on your behalf. The thought steadies you. The city does not sleep as deeply as it once did. Neither do you. Yet within that shared wakefulness, a quiet form of trust begins to grow fragile but real. You start to sense a different kind of order taking shape, one that does not announce itself with banners or uniforms. It moves quietly, passing through kitchens, back rooms, and borrowed offices. You hear about it indirectly through changes in tone and timing. Meetings happen earlier, messages arrive sooner, decisions feel coordinated without ever being called official. You notice how certain faces appear together more often now. merchants speaking with artisans, clergymen lingering near printers. Men who once stayed within their trades now cross paths regularly. These encounters are brief, purposeful, and rarely explained. Inside a candle-lit room, a handful of people gather round a table scattered with papers. The door is closed, but not locked. No one wants the appearance of secrecy. They speak in low voices, careful not to give the room more drama than it needs. This is not rebellion yet. It is organisation. You recognise some of the names mentioned. Others are new. Committees form and dissolve with ease, shaped around specific needs, correspondence, relief, enforcement of agreements no one has formally signed. Authority begins to feel local again, anchored in familiarity. You realise that decisions affecting daily life are increasingly made here, not announced from distant offices. The shift feels subtle but profound. You adjust without thinking, trusting guidance that comes from people you recognise rather than titles you do not. Information travels through these networks with surprising speed. A warning about a shipment, a request for support, a change in plan. Messages are carried by foot, by word, by implication. No single person holds the whole picture, yet the picture forms anyway. You notice a practical change. Disputes are settled faster, not always fairly, but efficiently. Community pressure replaces formal process. Reputation becomes currency again, backed by collective memory rather than paperwork. Some nights you catch a glimpse of someone leaving one of these meetings, folding a paper and slipping it into a coat. The action feels ordinary. It is meant to. Visibility protects as much as secrecy ever could. You sense unease alongside confidence. No one pretends this structure is perfect. It bends under strain. It relies on trust that has not yet been tested fully. Still it functions, and that alone feels remarkable. In your own routines, you begin to defer to this emerging order instinctively. You wait for guidance before acting. You check with neighbours before making decisions that might ripple outward. Collective judgment becomes a habit. A small, almost invisible change takes hold. People start using the word we more often than before. Not rhetorically, practically. We should wait. We will handle it. We decided. Language reflects alignment long before declarations do. You also notice who stays away. Those who hesitate. Those who refuse to engage. Their absence speaks quietly, shaping boundaries without confrontation. No one forces participation. Exclusion happens by gravity rather than decree. At the market prices, stabilise in ways that feel coordinated. At the docks, schedules align. At night, watches adjust routes without discussion. The city begins to move with shared intention even as disagreements persist. You feel both safer and more exposed. Safety comes from collective attention. Exposure comes from visibility. To belong now is to be known. Anonymity thins. At home, conversations shift. People speak less about what they believe and more about what needs to be done. Ideals recede slightly, making room for logistics. Action feels closer now, less theoretical. You lie awake one night thinking about how quickly this has come together. Not planned, not accidental, something in between. The city has found a way to respond to pressure by redistributing responsibility. In the morning, you hear someone refer to a decision made last night as settled. No explanation follows. No one asks for one. The matter moves on. You realise that this quiet structure may be the most radical development yet. It replaces waiting with doing. It fills a vacuum that authority left behind. As days pass, the system grows more confident. It learns from mistakes, adjusts, adapts. It does not seek permission. You understand now that power does not always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it grows by being useful by solving problems before anyone asks who authorized the solution. Walking through the city, you feel the change beneath your feet. The streets are the same, the buildings unchanged, but the current beneath daily life has shifted direction. As evening settles, lanterns glow, conversations soften, and the quiet machinery of coordination continues turning. You drift towards sleep, aware that something new is holding the city together. Not loudly, not visibly, but firmly enough to matter. You begin to sense the hidden roots long before anyone explains them to you. They reveal themselves through absence rather than presence. Goods that appear without fanfare. Items that return to shelves after weeks of scarcity. Prices that drop quietly as if nothing unusual had happened. The harbour still looks the same from a distance. Masts sway, ropes creak, water laps against hulls with steady patience. Yet beneath that surface rhythm, patterns have shifted. Ships unload at odd hours. Cargo moves quickly, often under cover of darkness or distraction. Official records no longer tell the whole story, and everyone seems to know it. You hear about a delivery before you see it. A neighbour mentions having flour again. A shopkeeper offers sugar without explanation. No one asks too many questions. Curiosity has learnt to coexist with discretion. You realise that smuggling is not treated here as crime so much as correction, a way of restoring balance when rules feel misaligned with reality. The word itself carries less weight than it might elsewhere. It sounds almost practical. Paths form through repetition, a certain dock, a familiar warehouse, a back room with a door that opens inward instead of out. People learn where to go without being told. Knowledge passes through proximity rather than instruction. You notice who participates: sailors who know tides intimately, merchants willing to risk reputation, carriers who move goods inland without drawing notice. Each role fits together, loosely adaptable if one piece fails. At home, you unpack items with new care. You do not display them prominently. You integrate them quietly into routine. A sack of flour becomes bread. A bolt of cloth becomes clothing. Once transformed, its origins matter less. There is tension here too. Not everyone approves. Some worry about consequences. Others worry about fairness. Smuggling favours those with connections. Inequities persist. Yet necessity dulls moral edges. You catch yourself practicing explanations that you hope you will never need. Where did this come from? A friend? A shipment? You keep answers vague, not out of guilt, but habit. Night work increases. Lanterns glow briefly, then vanish. Footsteps pass when streets should be empty. You lie awake listening, not alarmed, but attentive. Activity after dark has become normalised. You notice how children are kept away from certain areas without explanation. They learn boundaries without reasons. Some knowledge is delayed rather than denied. Morning brings plausible normalcy. Shops open, goods appear, conversation skirts details. The city performs continuity convincingly. You sense how fragile this arrangement is. One interruption could unravel it. A watchful official, a poorly timed rumour. Still it holds because enough people want it to. Later people will argue about whether this underground trade sustained resistance or simply postponed confrontation. Living inside it, you feel less theoretical. It keeps households fed. It keeps tempers from snapping. That feels like success. You begin to understand how law and legitimacy can separate quietly. One remains written, the other migrates into practice. The gap widens without ceremony. You walk past a familiar shop and catch the eye of the owner. There is a moment of recognition, not pride, not fear, just mutual understanding. This is how things work now. At home, you store what you have carefully. Supplies are not hoarded, but respected. You use what you need. You share when asked. Reciprocity becomes expectation. As days pass, the hidden roots feel less secret and more structural. They are spoken of obliquely, like weather patterns or seasonal changes. You adapt without celebrating. When you finally drift towards sleep, you think about how much of life now depends on systems no one will ever officially acknowledge. Invisible labour, unrecorded risk, shared silence. The city continues sustained by these unseen currents. You move with them not because you relish defiance, but because survival has found a way forward and you have learned to follow its path. You start to notice how differently people experience the same city. The streets do not change, but the way they press on you does. Wealth and poverty have always existed side by side here, yet now the contrast feels sharper, less willing to hide behind politeness. You see it first in the way people talk about risk. For some, risk sounds like inconvenience, delayed shipments, missed profits, awkward conversations with officials. For others, risk sounds like hunger, eviction, illness untreated because coin runs out before remedies do. The same events ripple outward, touching lives with very different force. Walking past the harbour, you watch merchants calculate quietly. Losses can be absorbed. Routes can be rerouted. Time can be bought. Inland labourers calculate too, but their margins are measured in days rather than months. A single interruption carries more weight. You feel this difference when conversation turns tense. Those with means speak in longer sentences. They allow themselves nuance. Those without speak plainly, sometimes sharply. Urgency trims language down to what matters most. At the market, pricing tells a story without commentary. Some stalls offer credit generously, others cannot. You see shoppers make choices that feel strategic rather than indulgent. Bulk purchases where possible, substitutions where necessary. Pride yields to practicality quickly. Clothing makes the divide visible as well. For some, homespun is chosen. For others, it is the only option. The symbolism blurs here. What reads as statement for one reads as necessity for another. You learn to recognize the difference in how garments are worn, not just what they are made of. You overhear a heated exchange between two men who agree on very little beyond frustration. One complains about losses tied up in delayed trade. The other snaps back about children who went to bed hungry. Both speak truth. Neither can fully hear the other. You notice how meetings shift tone depending on who is present. When merchants dominate discussions, lean toward strategy. When labourers speak, they lean toward immediacy, food, shelter, safety. The future feels shorter for some than others. At home, these differences shape family decisions. Those with resources plan contingencies. They store supplies. They make arrangements. Those without focus on endurance, stretching what exists, hoping stability returns before reserves disappear entirely. A quiet resentment simmers, not always directed upward, but sideways. toward neighbours who seem to worry about different things, toward arguments that feel detached from lived reality, unity proves more complicated than slogans suggest. You realise how often people talk past one another without meaning to. Shared words carry different meanings. Freedom sounds aspirational to some, precarious to others. Order sounds reassuring to some, threatening to others. Children notice this divide too. They compare lunches, shoes, household routines. They ask questions that adults answer vaguely uncomfortable, naming inequality outright. Awareness forms anyway. You see generosity emerge unevenly. Those with more give publicly. Donations, support, offers of work. Those with less give quietly, sharing meals, watching children, passing along information. Both forms matter, but they are rarely acknowledged equally. In taverns, seating patterns reveal subtle hierarchy. Who claims the warmest spot? Who stands rather than sits? Who buys rounds and who waits? These habits existed before. Now they feel heavier, more symbolic. You catch yourself adjusting how you speak depending on company. You soften some complaints. You sharpen others. Navigating class difference becomes another daily skill learned through trial rather than instruction. At night, you think about how hardship concentrates attention. Those closest to scarcity see threats sooner. Those buffered by comfort see options longer. Neither perspective is complete on its own. You begin to understand why agreement feels elusive. People are responding to the same pressure from different distances. What feels like patience to one feels like delay to another. What feels like caution to one feels like abandonment to another. Despite this, cooperation persists, because it must. The city functions through interdependence. Merchants need labour. Labour needs trade. Each relies on the other, even while resenting the imbalance. You notice moments when empathy breaks through. A merchant covering rent for a worker. A labourer protecting a shop during unrest. These gestures do not erase inequality, but they soften its sharpest edges. Arguments continue, disagreements flare, yet beneath them there is recognition. Everyone is being tested, just not in the same ways. As weeks pass, class lines strain, but do not snap. They bend under pressure, revealing fault lines that were always there. The revolution unfolding is not only against distant authority, it is against assumptions about who bears cost and who decides. Walking home one evening, you pass a row of houses lit unevenly. Some glow warmly, others remain dark. The contrast feels emblematic. Shared streets, divergent nights. You lie down thinking about how change rarely arrives evenly. It moves through society in waves, lifting some while leaving others scrambling to stay afloat. The challenge lies in recognizing this without losing sight of common cause. Sleep comes slowly. Your thoughts return to conversations overheard, faces noticed, tensions felt, but not resolved. The city is still one place, but it contains many experiences layered together. Tomorrow will bring the same negotiations between comfort and urgency, between patience and necessity, between ideals and survival. You will continue navigating them step by careful step, learning that unity is not the absence of difference, but the work of carrying it without letting it tear everything apart. You begin to notice the quiet absences before anyone names them. A neighbour who no longer joins conversations at the corner. A shop that opens later than it used to. A familiar face that turns away just a little too quickly when paths cross. These gaps feel heavier than arguments ever did. Loyalty is no longer an abstract idea here. It has settled into proximity. Who stands beside you? Who avoids standing anywhere near you? Allegiance expresses itself in timing, in hesitation, in the way greetings shorten or disappear altogether. You live next door to people who think differently than you do, and that fact presses in on daily life now. It shapes how you borrow tools, how you accept favours, how you explain yourself when explanations feel unnecessary. The smallest interactions carry risk. Some neighbours speak openly about their support for the Crown. Others keep their views carefully obscured. Silence itself becomes interpretable. You learn to read it like weather sensing when it signals caution and when it signals conviction. You notice how trust erodes not through confrontation, but through avoidance. Doors close sooner. Conversations end earlier. Invitations stop coming. The social fabric thins strand by strand. At the market, you catch fragments of disagreement that stop abruptly when someone unfamiliar approaches. Voices lower, faces reset. Public harmony becomes performance rather than reality. Children feel this shift too. They ask why certain houses feel different, why they are told not to play with certain friends after dark. Answers remain incomplete. Boundaries are enforced without explanation. You realise how difficult neutrality has become. Choosing not to speak is itself a choice now. Choosing not to act reads as alignment whether you intend it or not. The middle ground narrows quietly. Some people leave, not dramatically, not with announcements. They simply disappear from routine. A bed rented out, a shop shuttered, a household reduced to memory. Departure becomes another kind of statement. You notice how rumours attach themselves to absence. People speculate. They assign motives. Fear fills gaps where information should be. Certainty becomes improvised. Inside your own home, you discuss what to say and what not to say. Which topics are safe, which are not worth the risk. You practice answers aloud, then discard them, unsure which version of yourself is safest to present. You catch yourself listening through walls, not intentionally, habitually. Sound carries differently now. You are more aware of how much of life happens within earshot. Some neighbours attempt reconciliation. They speak carefully. They emphasise shared history, family ties, mutual dependence. These efforts feel sincere yet strained. Trust once fractured does not repair quickly. You sense grief beneath the tension. Not only for lives lost or livelihoods threatened, but for the ease that once existed, for conversations that did not require calculation, for relationships that did not demand alignment. In public gatherings, you see clusters forming along invisible lines. Who stands where? Who laughs together? Who remains at the edge? The city begins to map itself socially as well as physically. At night, you reflect on how quickly suspicion can replace familiarity. It unsettles you. You remind yourself that most people are still trying to live ordinary lives. That fear sharpens perception until everything feels intentional. Yet you cannot ignore the reality that some neighbours are now watching others closely, reporting behaviour, repeating overheard remarks. Incentives have shifted, and with them behaviour. You think about loyalty not as belief, but as behaviour under pressure. Who helps when asked? Who refuses? Who looks away? These actions matter more than words. The strain shows in small ways. A door slammed too hard, a greeting left unanswered, a favour declined without explanation. None of these are dramatic, yet together they alter the emotional temperature of the street. You adjust again. You choose your words more carefully. You limit your movements. You accept that some connections will fade no matter how much you wish otherwise. As days pass, you recognize that division does not require hatred. It only requires mistrust and enough reason to maintain it. That realization feels heavier than anger ever did. You walk past your neighbor's door one evening and hesitate, unsure whether to knock. You decide not to. The choice lingers with you longer than the action would have. Inside you sit quietly listening to the house settle. You think about how community can fracture without a single loud moment, how separation can happen politely, efficiently, and almost invisibly. Sleep comes, but it is thinner than before. Your mind replays small interactions, searching for meaning in tone and timing. You wish for simplicity. You accept complexity. By morning, the street looks unchanged. People pass. Shops open. Life continues. Yet beneath the surface, lines have been drawn that will not easily erase themselves. You step outside, aware that belonging now requires more than shared space. It requires trust, and trust has become something everyone guards closely. You move forward carefully, carrying that awareness with you, knowing that the city is no longer just a place you live, but a network of loyalties you must navigate quietly every day. You hear the drums before you understand what they mean. A low, steady rhythm carries through the streets, not hurried, not ceremonial, simply present. It reaches you through walls and windows, threading itself into whatever you are doing, until your hands pause and your attention shifts. Military movement has its own sound. Boots strike stone in unison. Leather creaks. Metal answers metal. Even without seeing them, you know a column is passing. The city seems to hold itself differently when this happens, as if buildings lean back slightly to make room. You step outside and watch from a careful distance. Soldiers move with purpose, their formation clean and practiced. Faces remain forward. The rhythm of the drums regulates more than pace. It regulates emotion. It keeps fear contained inside structure. People line the street without being asked. Some watch openly. Others pretend not to notice, lingering near doorways or windows. No one speaks loudly. The sound fills the space words would occupy. You notice how the route matters. Certain streets are chosen, certain corners avoided. This movement is meant to be seen, but not confronted. Visibility without engagement. Authority without invitation. Children freeze mid-play, eyes wide. Adults draw them closer. A hand rests on a shoulder. Another on a head. No explanations are offered. The lesson is conveyed through gesture. The drums do something curious to your body. Your breathing aligns with the rhythm before you realize it. The effect is grounding and unsettling at the same time. Order imposes itself quietly. You recognize some soldiers from previous encounters. Others are unfamiliar. Their presence feels heavier than usual, not because they act differently, but because the city has changed. Context sharpens everything. As the column passes, conversations resume slowly. People exhale without noticing. Someone clears their throat. A cart rattles forward again. Normalcy reasserts itself, but it feels thinner than before. Later you hear that more troops are moving through nearby towns, that supplies are being shifted, that plans are being adjusted. The details blur together, but the implication remains. Preparation is underway. At night, the sound returns in memory. You lie in bed, replaying the rhythm, counting beats without intending to. It echoes like a question without an answer. In the morning, you see the effects. Streets show fresh wear, mud pressed deeper into grooves. The city carries physical evidence of passage, even when no one speaks of it. You notice how people adapt quickly. Errands are timed to avoid routes likely to host patrols. Meetings shift locations. Gatherings shrink or spread out. Movement becomes strategic. The drums become a reference point in conversation. Not mentioned directly, but implied. Did you hear them last night? Were they closer than before? Each question carries more than sound. You think about how order relies on repetition, the same rhythms, the same formations, the same routes. Predictability becomes both comfort and threat. Sleep grows lighter. You wake more easily. The city does too. Dogs bark at unfamiliar movement. Lanterns flare briefly as windows open and close. You catch yourself imagining what would happen if the rhythm stopped suddenly. The thought unsettles you. Silence after order feels dangerous. As days pass, the presence of drums no longer shocks. It settles into expectation. You learn to live alongside it, measuring your days against its timing. Yet beneath that adjustment, tension hums. Each beat feels like a reminder. This is not over. Something is being prepared. Walking home one evening, you hear the drums fade into distance. The sound dissolves into the general noise of the city. You stand still a moment longer than necessary, listening for what comes next. Nothing does, and that absence carries its own weight. You return inside, closing the door gently. The house feels smaller, closer, as if walls have leaned inward. You sit letting the quiet gather. You understand now that sound has become a signal here. A way power announces itself without explanation. The drums do not argue, they do not persuade, they simply move. As you lie down, the rhythm lingers steady and unresolved. It rocks your thoughts without soothing them. Sleep comes eventually light and broken. Somewhere in the city, the drums will sound again. You do not know when. You only know that when they do, the streets will listen, and so will you. The harbour draws you the way a fire does when the room is cold. Even when you tell yourself you have no reason to go, your feet take you there. Water has always been Boston's pulse, but lately it feels like it's stage too, a place where attention gathers as naturally as gulls. You arrive when the light is fading, the surface of the water turning dark and reflective. Ships sit in rows, their masts cutting the sky into narrow pieces. The smell is sharp. Salt tar fish, wet rope. You breathe it in and feel your shoulders shift as if the body recognizes this place as both livelihood and threat. People linger near the wharves without appearing to linger. Someone leans against a post. Someone else pretends to check a knot. Small clusters form, then separate, then form again. No one claims to be waiting for anything yet. Everyone seems to be waiting. You feel a low hum of expectation. Not excitement exactly, more like the sensation of standing near a door before it opens. The city's attention narrows toward the water. Lanterns begin to appear, swaying in hands. Light glints off metal fittings and wet planks. Shadows stretch across faces. You recognize familiar figures by posture rather than by features. Everyone moves with quiet restraint, as if sound itself might disrupt whatever is about to happen. You notice how talk changes here. Less argument, more instruction, brief phrases, a nod, a hand gesture. People are not trying to convince one another in this moment. They are trying to coordinate. The harbour has always been a place of stories. Ships bring news. Sailors bring rumours. Cargo carries hints of distant decisions. Tonight those stories feel closer to action. You watch a group move toward a vessel. Their steps are deliberate. They do not rush, yet they do not hesitate. Others follow at a distance. You find yourself drawn along not from courage, but from the simple fact that the crowd is moving, and movement invites participation. No one says exactly what is happening. Words are scarce, yet the meaning becomes clear in fragments. Tea, cargo, duty, the same irritations that have hovered over tables and shops now gather weight in the shape of crates. Hands grip ropes, planks creak. The water laps against hulls, steadily indifferent to human tension. You hear the scrape of wood as something is shifted. The sound is practical, not dramatic, and that makes it feel more real. Faces remain set. Some people look outward, watching for interruption. Others focus on the task. The mood is strangely controlled, as if everyone has agreed that if this is to be done, it must be done without chaos. You catch a glimpse of something that surprises you, a quiet respect for process. The work is organised. Steps follow an order. There is an awareness that disorder would ruin the point. The crates are heavy. The effort required to move them is visible in bodies. Shoulders tense, breath shortens, yet no one complains. Complaining would break rhythm. Rhythm feels essential. You stand near the edge, close enough to smell wet wood, and hear the splash of water against the side. Your heart beats faster, but your hands remain still. Participation does not always mean action. Sometimes it means witness. A crate is opened, contents spill into sight. Not valuable in the way gold would be, yet priceless in the way symbols become. Tea is simple, familiar, yet here it becomes a test of will. The water receives it without ceremony. A splash, then another. Dark shapes vanish into darker water. The act is repetitive, almost monotonous, and that repetition gives it power. It is not a single gesture. It is an insistence made physical. You notice that the crowd does not cheer. There is no celebration. The mood remains tight, focused. People understand the seriousness. This is not a prank. It is not entertainment. It is a message. Wind shifts, carrying the smell of the harbour closer. Your fingers feel cold against your coat. You realise how vulnerable everyone is standing here. Exposure is part of the risk, yet the act continues. As the last of the cargo disappears into the water, the crowd begins to dissolve. Not suddenly. Gradually, like breath leaving lungs, people step back. They adjust clothing, they regain ordinary posture, they return to being citizens rather than participants in something larger. You walk away with the crowd, the sound of the water behind you, the lanterns growing fewer. The city ahead looks unchanged. Windows glow, streets remain narrow. Yet you know something has shifted again, another step taken that cannot be undone. At home, people speak of what happened in careful tones. Details are withheld. Names are not said. The act belongs to the city rather than to individuals. You lie down that night with the smell of salt still in your hair and the sound of splashing tea still echoing faintly. The harbour feels closer than it did before, as if the water has absorbed not only cargo, but certainty. Sleep comes slowly. Your mind keeps returning to the repetitive motion, the controlled urgency, the way ordinary people turned a practical place into a stage without needing permission. Tomorrow the city will wake and continue, but the harbour will look different even if the ships remain the same, and you will carry the memory of dark water swallowing tea steady and silent like a promise made without words. Winter settles in without asking permission. It does not arrive as a dramatic event, but as a slow closing of options. The air sharpens, breath becomes visible. The harbour stiffens around the edges, and the city adjusts the way it always has by enduring. You feel the cold first in the mornings. Floors pull heat from your feet before you are fully awake. Water takes longer to warm. Hands ache longer before loosening. You dress in layers that have grown familiar, adding and removing them through the day, like armour you no longer think about. The streets narrow under winter. Snow piles along edges, funneling people closer together. Movement slows. Errands are combined. No one wanders without purpose now. Time outdoors is measured carefully. Fuel becomes a quiet obsession. Wood is stacked, counted, guarded. Fires burn lower, steadier. You learn how to read a flame, how to coax warmth without wasting it. The hearth becomes the true centre of the home, not just for heat, but for decision-making. Meals change again. Freshness disappears. Preservation takes over. Salted meat, dried vegetables, bread that hardens faster than you would like. You eat more for sustenance than satisfaction. Those small comforts are treasured. A warm bowl, a shared loaf. These moments feel earned. You notice how winter reshapes social life. Visits shorten. Conversations cluster closer to heat. Silence becomes more companionable. There is less energy for argument, but tension does not disappear. It simply waits. The city sounds different now. Snow muffles footsteps. Voices carry oddly in cold air. The usual clatter softens, replaced by a quieter vigilance. At night, darkness feels heavier, more complete. Children spend more time indoors. Games adapt. Imagination fills the space movement once occupied. Stories are told more often, not just for entertainment, but to keep spirits from sinking. Laughter feels necessary rather than optional. You feel fatigue settle deeper this season. Not just physical tiredness, but a mental weariness that comes from sustained alertness. The questions that once demanded answers now hover unanswered. Waiting becomes its own strain. Outside, the harbour continues its work, slowed but not stopped. Ships come and go when they can. Ice forms and breaks unpredictably. The water feels less forgiving now, less patient. You notice how winter sharpens division and cooperation at the same time. Those with more share selectively, those with less rely more openly. Mutual dependence becomes obvious. Survival trims away pretense. At night you listen to the wind work its way through the city. It finds cracks you thought sealed. It presses against shutters. It hums in chimneys. The sound becomes a lullaby of sorts, reminding you that endurance is shared. You find yourself thinking less about the future and more about the immediate. Tomorrow's weather, tomorrow's fuel, tomorrow's meals. Long horizons shrink in cold months. This narrowing feels protective. Rumours still circulate, but they lose some urgency in winter. Action is harder now. Movement costs more. Plans are discussed, then postponed. The cold enforces patience, whether anyone wants it or not. You sense frustration building beneath this forced stillness. Energy has nowhere to go. Words repeat. Tempers shorten. Yet there is also relief in having an excuse to slow down. At home, routines tighten. Beds are shared more often. Blankets pile up. Sleep becomes heavier, though still lightened by worry. Dreams mix warmth and fear in uneven measure. You notice how small kindnesses stand out more sharply now. A neighbour offering wood, someone sharing food without comment. These gestures carry disproportionate weight against the cold. As days pass, the city feels suspended. Not calm, not explosive, held in place by weather as much as by circumstance. Winter presses pause without resolving anything. You realise that this season is buying time, not peace. It gives people space to recover, to think, to harden resolve, quietly. Beneath the snow movement continues in thought, if not in action. One evening, as you sit close to the fire, you feel an unexpected moment of stillness. The city seems distant. The conflict feels momentarily muted. You breathe more deeply than you have in weeks. You know it will not last. Spring will come, movement will return, decisions will demand themselves again. For now, winter holds everything in place. It teaches endurance. It tests patience. It wraps the city in silence thick enough to rest inside, even as tension waits beneath it. As you drift towards sleep, the fire settles into embers. The cold presses gently against the walls. You let yourself rest, knowing that this pause, however uncomfortable, is part of the story unfolding around you. The letters arrive quietly, folded and refolded until the creases soften. They come by hand more often than by post, passed along with a nod or slipped across a table as if they were nothing more than a receipt. Yet you feel their importance before you even open them. Paper has weight now, not because of what it costs, but because of what it carries. You read slowly, tracing the lines with your eyes while the room stays still around you. The words come from other towns, other ports, other places that suddenly feel closer than they ever did before. The tone varies. Some letters are careful and measured, others pulse with urgency. All of them share a recognition that what is happening in Boston is not isolated. You notice how often the letters describe ordinary life first. Weather, crops, trade. Then almost as an afterthought they turn toward tension, a new restriction, a gathering that grew too large, a rumour that refused to die. The structure feels intentional, as if grounding the message in normalcy makes the warning easier to absorb. As you pass the letter on, you watch faces change while reading. Brows knit, lips pressed together, a breath held slightly too long. No one reacts dramatically. Drama feels wasteful. The impact settles instead, quiet and cumulative. You realise that correspondence has become a kind of connective tissue. It links experiences across distance, turning scattered frustration into shared awareness. You are no longer guessing whether others feel the same strain. The letters answer that question plainly. Maps begin to appear on tables more often. Fingers trace routes, ports, roads, rivers. Geography shifts from background knowledge to practical concern. Distance is reconsidered, proximity redefined. At night, you lie awake thinking about places you have never visited, names you have only seen written. Yet they feel familiar now, bound to you by circumstance rather than experience. The sense of isolation that once marked colonial life thins. You notice a change in how people speak about themselves. Fewer references to town alone, more to something broader. Language stretches to accommodate this widening frame. It feels awkward at first, then natural. A letter arrives describing restraint. Another describes impatience. The contrast does not confuse you. It reassures you. Difference still exists. Uniformity has not erased individuality. Shared direction does not require identical pace. You see how quickly information moves when people want it to. Days rather than weeks. Hands rather than institutions. Trust accelerates what systems slow. You also sense the risk. Letters can be intercepted. Words can be misunderstood. Silence can follow without explanation. Each exchange carries vulnerability alongside connection. You begin to anticipate news from elsewhere the way you once anticipated ships in the harbour. You listen for footsteps, for voices at the door. The outside world presses closer to your daily rhythm. In conversations, people reference events you have only read about. You follow easily. The details have already taken root. Stories overlap. A shared narrative begins to form, incomplete but compelling. You realise that solidarity does not feel like excitement. It feels like gravity, a pull that aligns movement without demanding enthusiasm. You're being drawn into something larger, not through command, but through recognition. At home, letters are read aloud to those who cannot read themselves. The room listens together. Interpretation happens collectively. Questions are asked, assumptions corrected. Understanding deepens through discussion. Children hear these readings too. They sit quietly, absorbing names and places that will shape their sense of the world. Distance shrinks for them as well. You notice that decisions begin to factor in this wider awareness. Actions are weighed not just for local effect, but for how they might ripple outward. Responsibility expands. The city feels less alone now. That does not make it safer. It makes it braver in a careful way. Knowing others are watching, experiencing similar strain, changes how risk is perceived. As weeks pass, the flow of letters steadies. It becomes part of routine. Not every message brings urgency. Some bring reassurance. Some bring frustration. All reinforce connection. You think about how easily this network could unravel, how dependent it is on trust and shared purpose. Yet for now, it holds stitched together by paper and patience. One evening, you fold a letter carefully and tuck it away. You do not reread it. You already know what it says. Not in words, but in meaning. You are not alone. Others are walking this same uncertain path, step by step. As you prepare for sleep, that knowledge settles into you. It does not calm every fear, but it steadies you. The night feels slightly less vast when you know it is shared. Tomorrow will bring more news, or perhaps silence. Either way, you are listening now, attuned to a wider world that has begun to move in subtle alignment, carrying you with it whether you intended to go or not. You begin to measure your words more carefully than you ever measured distance. It happens without instruction. A pause before answering, a glance toward the door, a decision to let a thought remain unspoken. You're not afraid exactly. You are attentive, and attentiveness has become its own form of caution. The idea that someone might be listening settles into daily life quietly. It does not announce itself as paranoia. It feels practical. Walls are thin. Voices travel, people repeat things without realizing where they first heard them. You learn that information rarely stays where it is placed. You notice how conversations shift depending on who enters the room. A sentence trails off. A subject changes smoothly. Laughter arrives a beat too early. Everyone pretends this is coincidence. No one believes it is. At the market, you hear stories about questions being asked, about names written down, about someone being summoned and returning subdued. Details are inconsistent. That does not matter. The effect is the same. Awareness spreads faster than certainty ever could. You catch yourself rehearsing harmless explanations for ordinary actions. Why you were out late. Why you spoke with someone, why you attended a gathering. These explanations are rarely needed, but preparing them becomes habit. Children absorb this too. They are told not to repeat certain things outside the home. They nod seriously, sensing importance, even if they do not understand context. Secrecy becomes part of upbringing, folded into lessons about manners and safety. You notice a strange inversion. Silence begins to feel safer than honesty. Yet honesty feels heavier when finally expressed. Words accumulate pressure when they are not released. You feel that pressure in your chest during quiet moments. People develop codes without formal agreement, phrases that sound ordinary but carry meaning, questions that are really signals, responses that deflect rather than answer. You learn them by listening, by making small mistakes and adjusting. At night, you hear footsteps pause outside your door and move on. The sound lingers longer than it should. You remind yourself that the city is full of movement, that not every sound is meaningful. Still, you listen harder than you used to. You realize that trust has narrowed, not vanished, but concentrated. You trust fewer people more deeply. Circles tighten. Friendships become more intentional. Casual acquaintances fade into background. The strain shows in faces. Eyes scan more often. Smiles appear carefully. Humour turns dry-edged with awareness. Jokes that once felt harmless now feel risky, their meaning too easy to misinterpret. You notice how people test one another gently. A comment dropped lightly, a reaction observed. Agreement invites further sharing. Hesitation closes the door. This calibration happens constantly, almost invisibly. Inside your home, you speak more freely, yet even there you lower your voice without thinking. Habit overrides logic. The body remembers tension even when the mind insists on safety. You hear of someone leaving town abruptly. No farewell, no explanation. The absence generates more conversation than any departure ever could. Speculation fills the space left behind. You think about how fear reshapes time. Waiting feels longer. Nights stretch. Days feel compressed. Attention sharpens, then dulls from overuse. You crave normalcy and no longer remember what it felt like. Yet there are moments of release, a trusted conversation, a shared glance that says you are not alone. These moments feel precious precisely because they are rare. You realize that informers do not need to be everywhere to be effective. The possibility alone alters behavior. Uncertainty does the work that surveillance cannot. Still, resistance adds. Messages find new routes. Silence becomes selective rather than total. People learn when to speak and when to wait. This skill develops slowly, unevenly through experience rather than design. You notice that fear has not erased resolve. It has refined it. Anger becomes quieter. Determination becomes steadier. Impulse gives way to patience. As you move through the city, you sense layers of performance. Politeness overlaying caution, routine overlaying vigilance. Beneath it all, life continues, stubborn and ordinary. At night, lying in bed, you replay conversations, wondering how they might sound to someone else's ears. The exercise is exhausting. Sleep comes late, and when it does, it is light. Morning brings relief. Light reassures. Noise returns. The city feels less watchful in daylight, even if that is illusion. You breathe more deeply. You move more freely. You accept that this tension is now part of the landscape, like uneven streets or harsh winters. It must be navigated rather than solved. You learn to live with partial truth, to speak in fragments, to trust intuition over clarity. These adaptations do not feel heroic, they feel necessary. As days pass, you find a rhythm within the constraint, a way to be yourself without inviting trouble, a balance between silence and expression. You understand now that revolutions are not only fought in public acts, they are lived in private restraint, in the discipline of knowing when not to speak. As you drift towards sleep once more, the city hums softly outside. You listen not for danger, but for familiarity. The sound steadies you. Tomorrow will bring more choices, more moments of calculation. You will navigate them as you have learned to do, carefully, thoughtfully, carrying resolve quietly within you. You feel it in the way the city no longer feels provisional. Small preparations begin to appear everywhere, scattered and quiet like seeds pressed into soil without ceremony. Nothing is announced, nothing is declared. Yet people behave as if an answer may soon be demanded. At home, belongings are sorted without comments, items that matter are placed together, tools are checked, clothing is repaired with extra care. You notice yourself choosing what stays close and what can be left behind, even though you do not say why. Movement in the streets shifts again, not faster but more purposeful. People walk with destinations in mind rather than wandering. Conversations end with an understanding that time may be limited, though no one specifies how. You see men drilling briefly in open spaces, not in formation, not with commands, just testing weight and balance, seeing how bodies respond. The motions are awkward at first, then more confident. No one watches openly yet, no one pretends not to notice. Inside, workshops, production adjusts. Less ornament, more utility, items that can be carried, repaired, reused. Practicality pushes aside refinement without apology. You overhear someone discussing where family might go if things turn suddenly. The tone is calm, almost casual. Plans are framed as precautions rather than expectations. That distinction matters even if it grows thinner by the day. You feel an internal shift too. Fear remains, but it no longer paralyzes. It sharpens focus. You think in sequences now. If this happens, then this. If not, then wait. Contingency becomes a mental habit. Children sense the change without understanding it fully. They ask fewer questions and observe more. They watch adults pack and repack small bundles. They notice goodbyes that linger longer than usual. At night, sleep grows restless again, but not from shock, from anticipation. Your mind runs ahead of itself, rehearsing futures you hope will not arrive but no longer dismiss. You notice that arguments feel less abstract now. Theoretical positions give way to practical concerns. Who will be safe? Who will be fed? Who will be protected? The city's moral centre shifts toward care rather than rhetoric. People who once avoided one another begin exchanging nods. Differences remain, but urgency smooths edges. You realise that shared risk redraws boundaries faster than persuasion ever could. You hear the sound of wagons being prepared late into the evening. Wheels tightened, loads adjusted. The noise blends into the city's nighttime rhythm, easily overlooked unless you are listening for it. You think about how many moments like this exist in history, just before direction hardens, the pause before motion, the breath held collectively without instruction. Inside your home, you place a few essential items within reach of the door. The action feels symbolic, even if you refuse to label it. Readiness has become a comfort. You notice how language shifts again. Less speculation, more certainty in tone, even when facts remain unclear. People speak as if deciding aloud helps commit them internally. The city feels taut now, like fabric stretched evenly. Not tearing, not slack, just held. You step outside and look down the street. Lamps glow. Windows reflect familiar shapes. Nothing looks different yet. Everything feels aligned towards something unseen. You realise that preparation does not feel heroic. It feels domestic. It happens in kitchens, in workshops, in whispered plans shared at dusk. This is how large events are built quietly from ordinary decisions. As you return inside, you feel a calm settle that surprises you. Not relief, acceptance. Whatever comes will come. and you have done what you can to meet it with intention. Lying down, you let the future remain undefined. You do not need clarity tonight. You need rest. The city breathes around you steady and waiting. You breathe with it, knowing that the next turn will arrive soon enough, and that when it does, you will step into it, awake, prepared, and no longer pretending that this moment will simply pass. You wake with the sense that staying has become a decision rather than an accident. It is not announced. No one congratulates you for it. Yet the choice sits with you as you move through the morning, shaping how you pack a bag, how you greet neighbours, how long you linger at doorways. Some people have already gone. You notice it in small absences, a room suddenly available, a shop shuttered with no sign explaining when it might reopen, a family spoken of in the past tense, even though they left only days ago. Departure happens quietly here, wrapped in practicality rather than drama. You consider what leaving would mean. The road out of town, the cost of transport, the uncertainty beyond familiar streets. Staying carries its own risks, but they are known ones. You weigh familiarity against possibility, and familiarity keeps its hold. You see others wrestling with the same calculation. Conversations drift toward logistics. Who has family elsewhere? Who has skills that travel well? Who can afford delay? The city becomes a place of sorting not by force, but by inclination and capacity. At the docks you watch ships being readied with unusual care, cargo arranged efficiently, provisions secured. People linger longer than necessary, eyes scanning the water. The harbour offers escape and entanglement at the same time. Children are brought along on errands they once skipped. They are kept close. Hands are held longer. Adults explain routes and landmarks with care as if mapping memory rather than space. You feel the emotional weight of staying most sharply in quiet moments. A familiar street at dusk. The sound of a door closing nearby. The way the city smells after rain. These sensations bind you more tightly than ideology ever could. Inside homes, discussions grow practical. What to save? What to leave? What can be replaced and what cannot? These choices reveal values more clearly than speeches ever would. You hear someone say they are staying because this is where their work is. Another because this is where their parents are buried. Another because leaving feels like surrender. Each reason carries its own logic. None are easily dismissed. You realise that staying does not mean certainty. It means proximity to consequence. Whatever unfolds, you will be near it, affected by it, shaped by it. Distance would dull impact, but also remove agency. At night, you imagine the city without you. The thought feels wrong, like a story missing a chapter. You imagine yourself elsewhere and feel unmoored. Belonging asserts itself quietly. You also notice resentment toward those who leave. Not anger exactly, a sense of abandonment. Then you check yourself. Survival looks different depending on circumstances. Judgment softens when empathy follows. As days pass, departures slow. Those inclined to go have gone. Those who remain settle into the knowledge that they will see this through, whatever it becomes. You watch the city respond to that realization. Routines adjust. Expectations solidify. People look one another in the eye more often, as if confirming mutual presence. At the market, transactions carry an undertone of commitment. I will see you tomorrow. We will manage. The future narrows into something immediate and shared. You think about how history often remembers those who leave as footnotes, if at all. Those who stay become the setting in which events occur. Not heroes by default, just witnesses who cannot look away. Inside your home, you unpack what you had prepared to carry. Not everything. just enough to signal that you are here for now. The gesture feels grounding. Sleep comes unevenly, but when it does, it carries a sense of resolution. Not peace, but alignment. You are where you are meant to be, even if you do not yet know why. Morning light returns familiar and insistent. You step outside and breathe in air that feels claimed, not owned, but inhabited with intention. You understand now that staying is an act of patience, of endurance, of willingness to be present when presence becomes costly. As you walk the street, you feel the city around you respond, not with gratitude, but with recognition. You belong to this place, and it belongs to you, at least for now. Whatever comes next will unfold here. You have chosen not to step aside. The decision does not feel brave. It feels necessary. You continue on carrying that necessity quietly, ready to meet what remains. You sense the edge before you see it. Not a line drawn on the ground, not a proclamation nailed to a door, but a subtle thinning of ordinary life. Conversations shorten. Plans are made with fewer assumptions. The city feels poised like a held breath that has gone on just a moment too long. Morning routines continue, yet they feel rehearsed now, as if everyone is performing normalcy while waiting for a cue. You drink, eat, dress, and step outside with an awareness that these familiar acts may soon be interrupted. Nothing has happened yet. That is what makes the waiting heavy. You notice how often people pause mid-task and look down the street, listening, watching, expecting. The future presses closer than it ever has, close enough to feel, but still just out of view. The harbour remains busy, but its energy has changed. Ships arrive and depart under watchful eyes. Cargo is handled with care that feels almost reverent. The water reflects the sky with deceptive calm. You have learnt not to trust surfaces. You hear more talk of musters, of supplies being counted and recounted, of men who were once simply neighbours now being thought of in different terms. Roles are shifting quietly even before anyone names them. Inside homes, final adjustments are made without ceremony. A few more items are set aside. A few more words are spoken that would have gone unsaid before. You notice how goodbyes stretch slightly longer, even when no one is leaving yet. Children sense the gravity. They behave with an attentiveness that surprises you. They ask fewer questions. They watch more closely. Their play grows quieter, more focused, as if mirroring the adults around them. You feel a steady calm settle over you that feels different from resignation. It is readiness. You have been preparing without knowing it, adapting to pressure, until adaptation has become second nature. The city no longer feels divided in the same way. Differences remain, but they recede in the face of immediacy. What matters now is not agreement, but presence. Who is here? Who will act? Who will remain? As evening approaches, the light takes on a familiar softness. Lamps glow, fires are tended, supper is eaten with care. You savour small comforts, aware that their simplicity may soon feel distant. Outside, footsteps echo with unusual clarity. The city listens to itself. Somewhere a sound carries farther than expected. You cannot place it, but you feel its significance. You lie down, knowing that the next chapter will not wait for permission. Whatever unfolds, it will move quickly, reshaping the familiar into something unrecognizable. Yet there is no panic in you now, only awareness. You have lived through the tightening, the waiting, the quiet preparations. You understand how you arrived at this edge. Sleep comes more gently than you expect. The body recognizes when vigilance can briefly ease. The city hums softly outside, not calm, but contained. As you drift, the sense of being part of something larger settles into you. not as pride, as connection. You are one life among many standing at the threshold of change. You know that tomorrow or the next day, events will break the surface. Names will be given, dates recorded, meanings argued over, but tonight you rest in the last moment before definition. The city breathes in, you breathe with it, and as sleep deepens, you allow yourself to let go, trusting that whatever history decides to call this moment, you have lived it fully, attentively and honestly. Wind down. The night stretches gently now, unhurried and kind. The edges of the city soften as your thoughts slow, no longer tracking every sound, every possibility. You are allowed to rest here in this quiet pocket between what was and what will be. The streets fade into memory. The harbour becomes a distant murmur. Lamps dim one by one until the world is held together by only a few steady points of light. Your breathing finds its own rhythm again, deep and even, no longer tied to vigilance. You have walked these streets. You have listened, waited, adapted. For now there is nothing more asked of you. The weight of the moment eases as sleep takes over the work of holding everything together. Let the city drift. Let the tension dissolve. Let history pause just for this night. You are safe, you are still, you can rest. Sweet dreams.